Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was heading east on 50 through Nevada, maybe an hour past Ely, hauling a load of concrete forms out of Sacramento. It was close to midnight, early March, and the temperature had dropped hard once the sun dipped. The wind was cutting across the flats, low and steady, and I hadn't seen another pair of headlights in probably 30 miles. I'd done that route a dozen times. Nothing out there but sagebrush and long, empty miles. I was just past a wide bend where the desert opens up, right before it narrows again into that stretch near the Pancake Range. Not a town for hours either way, unless you count Austin. And that's not much more than a gas station and a diner. I first noticed the lights around mile marker 132. They weren't headlights exactly. Not halogens or LED bars like you'd see on another rig or pickup. Just two dim, round lights, almost amber-colored, maybe 100 yards behind me and low to the ground. At first I figured it was someone driving with their fog lights on and their highs off. I kept checking the mirrors, waiting for them to come closer, but the lights just stayed the same distance back, like they were pacing me. I tapped my brakes once, a quick check. No change. The road was straight. Nothing to pull off onto. No shoulder, just that soft drop-off where the sand starts. I figured I'd wait until one of the rare gravel cutouts and let whoever it was pass. But 5 miles later, they were still back there. Not gaining, not falling back. I keyed my mic and tried channel 19. Westbound on 50, anyone running up behind a flatbed east of Ely? Nothing. No truckers, no chatter, just static. I tried 13, then 9, nothing. That's when I started to get this weird pressure behind my eyes, like the kind you get when you're driving at altitude too long, like your sinuses are swelling up. I opened the window a crack. Cold air came in sharp and dry. The lights behind me blinked once, not like a signal, just a single pulse. Then back to steady. Another mile passed. Still no shoulder. The desert to my left looked flat enough to pull into, but I wasn't about to risk getting stuck off-road with a full load. I hit the brakes again. Harder this time. Downshifted. Let the truck slow. The lights behind me slowed too. They stayed the same distance back. Always that same 100 yards. I felt something shift in my gut. Not fear exactly. Just that kind of stillness when you know something's wrong but haven't figured out what yet. The next cutout came up maybe a minute later. Wide enough for 2 trucks if you lined up tight. Gravel packed down pretty well. I turned into it and let the truck roll to a stop, hazards on. I watched the mirror. Nothing followed me in. I leaned over and looked through the passenger mirror. The road was empty. The lights were gone. I turned off the hazards, killed the engine, stepped down into the dust. The only sound was the wind moving across the plain. I walked back along the trailer, looking toward the highway. No lights, no taillights, no engine noise, just open dark and the soft hiss of wind through the brush. I crouched and checked the sand near the edge of the cutout. There were no tire tracks behind my truck. None. Not mine. Not anyone else's. I stood there for a long time, just listening. I even climbed up on the step of the cab and turned in a full circle, looking out over the land. I couldn't see a thing. No movement, no distant lights, just the faint orange glow low on the horizon behind me from wherever the last town had been. I got back in the truck and locked the doors, started the engine. The clock on the dash said 12:42. I was sure it had been only 5 or 10 minutes since I pulled over, but it had been 12:17 when I saw the mile marker. I put the truck back in gear and eased out onto the road again. No other cars passed me for the next 2 hours. Somewhere outside Eureka, I stopped for coffee at a little 24-hour Sinclair. I asked the cashier if there were any construction crews running late-night convoys through the basin, maybe a pilot car or someone with amber strobes. She shook her head and said no one worked nights out there. Too far from anything. I got to my drop in Ely the next morning. The guy receiving the load asked if I'd hit weather, said I was almost an hour behind schedule. I checked my logs. Nothing showed up as a delay, no timestamp out of place. GPS didn't flag any long stops, but I remember exactly where I pulled over. I remember the gravel, the cold. I went back through the dash cam footage a few days later once I was back in Reno. Everything looked normal. My truck, the road, nothing behind me, not even headlights. But for 12 minutes, the video goes fuzzy. Not full static, just this blur like heat distortion from 12:30 to 12:42. You can hear the engine idling, the wind, nothing else, and no tire tracks behind me. We were camped out just north of the Mojave Preserve, off one of those dirt roads that don't show up on most maps. The plan was 2 nights in the RV, off-grid, no reception, just us and the desert. My girlfriend, Jenna, had never done any boondocking before, but I'd taken the trailer out on trips like this a handful of times. Nothing fancy, just a 19-foot Lance with solar, water tanks, and a little propane heater if it got cold. It was the second night. Clear skies, no wind, not a sound outside except the occasional rustle of creosote in the breeze. We'd gone to bed around 10, maybe a little later. We'd grilled hot dogs and played gin rummy until we were both too tired to keep our eyes open. No alcohol, no drugs, nothing like that. The windows were open, just the screens in, and we had the vent fan going on low to keep the air moving. I remember the stars were ridiculously bright. The kind of clear where you could see the Milky Way without trying. Jenna commented on it before we went to bed. I think the last thing she said was, "I've never seen it that dense before." I woke up in the dark. Not sure what time it was, but I remember it was cold, colder than it had been when we went to sleep. I reached over to the little digital clock on the shelf above the bed to check the time. It was off. I thought maybe the batteries died, but that clock runs off the trailer's 12-volt system, and the solar charge had been full that afternoon. Still, maybe the battery drained. I grabbed my phone off the counter. Wouldn't turn on. Just a black screen. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. The vent fan had stopped. No soft hum, no air moving. I sat up and looked around. Jenna stirred a little but didn't wake. The blue LED on the smoke detector, normally a faint glow, was out. The little fridge light, off. Even the inverter's panel, which always blinks green, wasn't doing anything. The trailer was completely dead. I fumbled for my watch on the shelf next to the stove. One of those Casio analog digital hybrids. I hadn't taken it off in a year. It said 417. The digital screen was dark and the second hand was stuck between ticks. Just frozen there. I grabbed Jenna's Fitbit from the hook where she'd hung it. 417. No backlight, no pulse readout. Just stuck. I shook her awake. She was groggy at first, but sat up pretty quick when I told her everything was off. She started checking her phone, then the flashlight by the sink. Nothing worked. Not even the battery-powered lantern under the bench. The weird thing was, none of the batteries were hot or drained. They were just off, like they didn't exist. We opened the door to check outside. The air was still, cold. The kind of cold that doesn't feel like weather, more like absence. I stepped out with bare feet. Sand and grit under me. No moon, just the stars, but they didn't look right. It took me a second to realize what was off. They weren't twinkling, they were just there. Sharp and still like pinholes in black paper. I've never seen the sky that static before. It didn't feel natural. The desert always has some shimmer, some movement in the air. But this felt like everything was holding its breath. We stood outside for a minute, not saying anything. Then Jenna pointed toward the rocks behind the trailer. There was a light, soft blue-white, low to the ground, not a beam. More like a dull glow. It wasn't moving, just sitting there behind a low ridge, maybe 200 feet away. I whispered, "Is that a car?" She didn't answer. I walked around the side of the trailer trying to get a better angle, but the boulders blocked most of the view. The light didn't pulse or flicker. It just hovered, right at the line where the earth met the sky. We stood there for maybe a minute, watching it. Then it disappeared. Not slowly, just gone. The second it vanished, we heard this sound, hard to explain. Not mechanical, not wind. Just a deep pressure, like a silent hum that pressed against your chest. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then faded. We ducked back into the trailer. Jenna locked the door, even though we were 50 miles from anything. I tried the stove light again. Still dead. I don't know why, but I pulled the curtain back and looked outside one more time. There were 3 small lights now, much farther off near the horizon. low just over the brush, perfectly spaced, like they were watching. Then two of them slowly blinked out. One stayed a few seconds longer, then followed. We didn't sleep. We just laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, holding hands. The clock still said 4:17. Nothing changed. Then at some point, it must have been hours later, the fridge compressor kicked on, just out of nowhere. The fan started spinning. The LED on the inverter came back to life. Jenna's Fitbit vibrated once, then lit up. 6:49 a.m., the clock above the bed reset itself to 12 and started blinking. Outside, the sun was just starting to come up behind the ridge. Everything looked the same. No tracks, no lights, no sign of anything. But every device that had a clock on it, the watch, the Fitbit, my phone, they were all stuck on 4:17 until they powered back, and none of them recorded any activity between 10 p.m. and that moment. I tried to check the trailer battery status, full charge, solar panels working, no reason for a total shutdown like that. We packed up right after breakfast and left. Didn't stay for the third night. The place just felt empty. Not quiet. Empty. We drove into Barstow and stopped at a diner. Jenna asked me not to bring it up again. I didn't argue. I knew what I saw. So did she. We still take trips sometimes, but not out there. Not anywhere that remote. Not anymore. I was camping out near Factory Butte in Utah. No trail, just BLM land. Parked the truck way off the dirt road and hiked maybe a quarter mile with my gear. I'd done it before. I like camping solo out there. It's wide open, mostly flat with weird hills and rock formations like you're on the moon. And at night it's so dark you can see satellites crawling across the sky. That night was clear. No wind, cool but not cold, early October. I set up camp around 6:30, just a little one-man tent and a small fire pit made from a few rocks. I made a dehydrated meal, watched the sky go orange, then purple, then pitch black. Stars came out hard, brightest I'd seen all year. No moon. I stayed up a while, just sitting in my camp chair drinking cheap whiskey from a metal flask and watching for shooting stars. I had my phone off. No service anyway. The silence out there is hard to explain. It's like your ears start making up sounds to fill the space. A few times I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but it was always just wind shifting or the sound of my own blood in my ears. Sometime after 11, I climbed into my tent. I didn't sleep right away. I remember lying there listening to this buzzing in my head. Not a sound exactly, but like pressure, kind of like being in a plane that's still climbing. I figured I was overtired or maybe a little dehydrated. I closed my eyes, but that feeling wouldn't go away. Then I heard what I thought was a jet, a deep, low rumble, starting far off. You hear military jets sometimes out there, flying low across the desert, so I didn't think much of it. But it got louder, and it wasn't moving across the sky. It was staying in one spot, right above me. The whole tent started vibrating. Not violently, just enough to make the poles flex a little. I thought maybe a plane was banking directly overhead or circling. After maybe 20 seconds, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Right away, I knew something was off. It was dead quiet. No rumble, no jet, no wind, just silence. I looked up, and the stars were gone. Not all of them. Just this perfect circle of sky directly above me, totally blacked out, like someone had taken a cookie cutter and punched out a chunk of the night. It didn't look like clouds. Clouds move. This was perfectly still, perfectly round, and it wasn't just dark, it was black. Like it absorbed all the light around it. The stars at the edge of it looked brighter, like the contrast was turned up. I stood there staring for a Zerger. I don't know how long. 5 seconds? A minute? Then I noticed the edges were pulsing. Not like lights, more like heat ripples, just at the very edge of the circle. And there was a faint hum again. Not from the sky, though, it was inside my chest. That pressure was back. My skin felt tight. I started to feel really exposed, like I was standing under a microscope. I stepped back toward my tent without taking my eyes off it. I was holding my breath without realizing. Then, without a sound, the black circle just faded. Not all at once. It was like the stars bled back in, one by one, until the whole sky was normal again. The second it was gone, the breeze kicked back up. I could hear myself breathing again. I didn't go back in the tent. I sat by the fire pit and just watched the sky for a while. Nothing happened. No jets, no lights, no sound. Around 2 a.m., I crawled back inside and zipped it up. I didn't sleep. Next morning, I broke camp as soon as the sun came up. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just packed everything in 15 minutes and hiked back to the truck. But when I got there, something was off. The driver's side door was unlocked. I always lock it, always, especially when I leave it overnight in the middle of nowhere. I don't even think about it. It's muscle memory. Nothing was missing. Glove box was still closed, cooler was untouched in the bed. But the cab smelled weird, like static almost, like the way old electronics smell when they overheat. I drove out of there fast, bouncing all over the road. I kept checking the rear view like I expected someone to follow. There was nothing, just that endless empty landscape behind me. I didn't stop until I hit Hanksville. Pulled into a gas station, filled up, used the bathroom, and sat in the truck for a long time with the AC blowing. I checked my phone, no texts, no missed calls, just a weird notification saying SIM error for a few seconds before it fixed itself. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how precise that black circle was. Perfectly round, no blur at the edges, like geometry, like a hole in the sky. I haven't camped alone since. I was driving west on Highway 36 through Kansas, just past Belleville. This was in late July, 2 summers ago. I was coming back from visiting my cousin in Missouri, spur of the moment thing, and I wanted to make it back to Colorado by morning because I had a shift starting at 8 a.m. at the hospital. I'm a radiology tech, not super exciting, but I've been doing it long enough that pulling an all-nighter on a road trip didn't feel like a big deal at the time. It was just after 9 p.m. when I left. Sky was still holding a bit of pink in the west, but the air was thick and warm, one of those nights where everything feels kind of soft and slow. I had a few snacks, a Red Bull, music on low. I remember thinking how empty everything felt once I got past the last gas station in Mankato. Nothing but two-lane road and cornfields, stretching flat in every direction. About an hour in, I saw a light behind me. Not headlights. It was way higher. At first, I thought it might be a plane, but it wasn't blinking, just a steady white point, kind of yellowish around the edges. I watched it in the rear view for a bit. It stayed in the same spot in the mirror, like dead center, not drifting left or right, no matter how much the road curved. I thought maybe it was just an illusion, like Venus or something bright low in the sky, but it felt wrong. I kept driving. 20 minutes later, it was still there. Same size, same spot in the mirror. Not getting smaller like a plane flying away would. Not moving at all, really. I tapped the brakes to slow down and see if the light would move relative to me. It didn't. Stayed fixed in that exact slice of mirror. I rolled down the window and leaned my head out while I drove, trying to look back at it directly, but I couldn't find it with my eyes. It was only visible in the mirror. Every time I craned my neck or twisted around in my seat, it just wasn't there. But the second I looked back in the mirror, boom, there it was. Dead center. That's when I started to feel it. That slow, crawling sensation in your gut. Like your body knows something before your brain does. I turned off the music and just listened. My tires humming on the pavement, a bit of wind, some rattling from the cooler in the back seat. Otherwise, nothing. I turned the mirror up to the ceiling. Couldn't stand looking at it. I kept driving. The road was empty. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. I passed one little grain elevator with a blinking red light and a sad-looking gas station that was already closed up for the night. Then more cornfields. Then just darkness again. Somewhere outside Norton, maybe 11:30, I stopped at one of those picnic pull-offs. Just a little gravel loop with a trash bin and a metal table under a pavilion. I got out to stretch and pee. While I stood there next to the car, I tried to find the light in the sky again. This time, I saw it, faint, directly east, just hovering above the horizon line. Still not blinking, still not moving. I stared at it for a long time, probably 10 minutes. My eyes kept wanting to drift away from it, like it was hard to focus on for more than a few seconds at a time. Like it was boring? That doesn't make sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. My attention kept slipping off it, even though I was trying to concentrate. I got back in the car and drove on. About 20 minutes later, I looked at the side mirror. just glanced at it out of habit, and the light was back. Now, slightly brighter, still perfectly centered, still not moving. The car started to feel smaller around me. I could hear every little squeak in the dashboard, every crackle from the tires over rough patches. The air in the cabin felt dense, like I was gaining elevation, even though the terrain was flat. I turned off the AC, rolled down the windows. That's when I noticed something else. There were no bugs. I hadn't hit a single moth or beetle or whatever in almost an hour. Normally, driving through Kansas at night in the summer, you're basically sandblasting your windshield with bugs, but mine was still clear. I turned the rearview mirror back down. The light was bigger, closer. I braked again, just slightly, and watched to see if it would shift, but it didn't. Still locked in place, like it was being projected into the mirror, not actually out there in the sky. I started saying things out loud just to hear my own voice. Stuff like, it's probably just a helicopter, or there's a tower I missed, but none of it made sense. Helicopters move. Towers don't follow you across 2 counties. I pulled off again outside of Oberlin, another rest stop, this one with a bathroom. I sat on the curb next to my car and smoked. I don't even smoke. I found an old pack in the glove box that belonged to my ex and just needed something to do with my hands. I didn't look at the sky. I couldn't bring myself to. After 15 minutes, I got back in the car. I didn't look at the mirror. I adjusted my seat so I couldn't see it even if I wanted to. I drove the rest of the way to the Colorado state line like that. Hunched down, eyes on the road, ignoring the strange weight I felt behind me. By the time I got to home, it was almost 4 in the morning. I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a long time before going inside. The sky looked normal. Light was gone, birds were chirping, a neighbor's sprinklers kicked on. I never saw it again, but for 2.5 hours it followed me. Never speeding up, never slowing down. Just hovering in that same exact spot in the mirror, like it was waiting for something. I was parked just off Groom Lake Road around midnight, late October of last year. I'd driven out from Kingman for the weekend. Nothing special, just needed to get away from everything. I'd done the Area 51 tourist route before, the usual photo by the warning sign, but this time I planned to just stay put for a few hours and watch the sky. I brought a folding chair, some snacks, a cheap monocular I'd bought at a pawn shop, and a blanket. No cell signal out there, so I downloaded a couple of star maps ahead of time and put my phone in airplane mode. It was colder than I expected, maybe low 40s, but the sky was crystal clear. No clouds, no moon, just an ocean of stars above me. I parked about 200 yards off the main dirt road on one of the pullouts where the ground flattens out. No lights for miles. I turned off the engine, left the keys in the cup holder, and stepped out. The mountains out there, the ones that ring the base, they look painted on. At night, they just become jagged shadows, no depth or texture, like cardboard cutouts leaning against the stars. There's one range in particular to the north that always looks closer than it is. I think it's called the Papoose Range. That's where I was looking. I had the monocular trained up on a cluster of stars near Cassiopeia when I noticed a subtle flash, not from the sky, but from the ground. It wasn't bright. More like when you blink and think you saw lightning, but there's no sound. It came from the mountains, a quick strobe, just once, maybe half a second. It wasn't white or blue like lightning. It was this dull orange, almost amber, like a sodium lamp. Not natural, definitely not from a plane or a car. I lowered the monocular and stared at the range, and for that split second, I swear, the mountains flickered, like an old film reel skipping a frame. The ridgeline shifted. Not moved, changed. I saw something behind it, or inside it. A shape. It was maybe the size of a small stadium. Angular, almost like an arch or dome. The only reason I noticed it at all was because it didn't match the surrounding terrain. It was too smooth, too symmetrical. Then the light blinked off and it was just the mountains again. I stood completely still for a long time, trying to process what I'd just seen. I thought maybe it was fatigue or some weird trick of my vision, so I sat back down, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and just stared at that spot. About 10 minutes passed, no sound, no movement. I was starting to relax again when my car's dome light flicked on. The driver's side door was still shut. I was sitting 10 feet away. No animals around, no wind. But the interior light was on, glowing faint through the windows like someone had cracked the door, except it was still sealed. I walked over, opened the door fully, and looked inside. Nothing was disturbed. Keys still in the cup holder. Windows rolled up. I closed the door again and the light shut off. I sat behind the wheel, engine off, and stared at the mountains through the windshield. Every few minutes I thought I saw tiny flickers, not as strong as the first one, just faint pulses like heat lightning without clouds. I turned on the radio. Static. Every station, AM and FM. Just dead air, not even the usual background fuzz. That made me uneasy. There's usually something, even out there. I turned the radio off and cracked the window an inch. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. Like, nothing. No insects, no wind, just dead, airless silence. I sat like that for another 30 minutes, watching the mountains, expecting them to stutter again, but they never did. But the silence stayed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind the ridgeline, something that wasn't part of the desert. Eventually, I turned the ignition and started the car. Everything came on normally. No dashboard lights, no system errors. I drove back down Groom Lake Road slow, glancing in the mirror every so often. Once I hit the highway again, the radio stations came back, one by one. Static faded, music returned, talk shows popped up. The desert behind me looked like it always did, vast and empty. I've been out there a few times since. Never saw that flicker again. But I don't park near that stretch of mountains anymore. I was camped out alone near the Lake Jocassee up in the Blue Ridge foothills. I'd been hiking all day and pitched my tent around dusk just off one of the side trails. Nothing official, but there was a decent clearing under some pines. It was early October, and the air had that damp, leaf-mulchy smell, cool but not cold. Sky was clear. Moon was almost full. I'd packed light, just the basics. One-person tent, foam pad, sleeping bag, stove, water bladder, and a small dry bag with food. I made some instant rice and tuna, listened to a few songs on my phone, then zipped everything up and called it a night around 10. I remember putting my boots under the flap right outside the door and tucking my pack inside at the foot of my sleeping bag. I always do that to keep animals from chewing on anything. I fell asleep to the sound of crickets and leaves shifting in the breeze. It was quiet, but not silent. The usual woods noise. Then, sometime deep into the night, I woke up. I couldn't tell what time it was. My eyes were open, but I couldn't see anything at first. Everything was just white. Not bright white like a flashlight in your face, more like a heavy fog, glowing from all directions. The whole inside of the tent was filled with it. There were no shadows, no corners, just light. And it was silent, completely, absolutely silent. That's what got me. It wasn't just that I couldn't hear anything outside. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no insects, not even the rustle of the sleeping bag when I shifted. I couldn't hear myself breathe. I remember opening my mouth to try and say something. I could feel my jaw move, feel the vibration in my throat, but there was nothing. No sound. I sat up, or thought I did, but it felt slow, like I was underwater. My limbs moved, but not the way they were supposed to. There was this weird delay, and my arms felt heavier than they should have. I tried to unzip the tent, but I couldn't find the flap. My hands just kept passing through light. It was like the tent wasn't there anymore, like the space around me had changed, but I hadn't caught up. Then everything faded out. Not suddenly, more like something dimming the world around me. The white glow sank away like a light being swallowed, and I don't remember anything else. When I came to, it was morning. Sun was coming through the trees. The first thing I noticed was how hot and cramped I felt. My mouth was full of something. I coughed and realized I had my pack half on my face. My sleeping bag was tangled around my legs, and my camp stove was jammed against my ribs. All my gear was inside the tent with me. All of it. The bear bag, which I'd strung up 20 feet away before bed, was lying across my chest. My boots were in there too, still muddy, wedged under my knees. The dry bag with food, the fuel canister, the trekking poles. Everything I'd left outside or packed away was now just piled on top of me. It was like someone had dumped all my gear on me in the night and zipped the tent shut again. I sat up slowly. My head was pounding. I had this dull ache behind my eyes, like a dehydration headache, but worse. My throat felt raw. When I unzipped the tent and looked around, the woods were quiet again. Normal quiet. Birds chirping, a squirrel tearing around up in the trees. I staggered out and immediately saw the rope I'd used for the bear bag. It was still tied around the same branch, but the knot was undone and the line was hanging limp, almost touching the ground. The bag had been cut clean open, not clawed, not chewed, just a straight, smooth slice. My boots were damp, like they'd been in wet grass, but there hadn't been any dew the night before, and the tread was packed with a reddish mud I didn't recognize. Not the kind of dirt in that part of the forest. Too fine, too clay-like. I checked my phone. It was dead. Battery had been around 60% when I went to sleep, but now it was black. Wouldn't even show the charge icon when I plugged in the solar pack. Everything felt off. I wasn't missing any time as far as I could tell. The sun was about where it should be early morning, maybe 7 or 8, but it was like I hadn't really slept, like my body had been through something and hadn't caught up. When I broke camp, I found something I hadn't noticed before. Just outside the clearing, maybe 30 feet into the brush, there was a small circle in the grass, maybe 5 or 6 feet across. The ground there was flattened, not trampled, just pressed down like something heavy had rested there. No scorch marks, no tracks, just a perfect round patch where the plants were bent outward in every direction. I checked for signs of animals, but didn't see anything. No fur, no droppings, not even broken branches nearby. Just that one weird, quiet circle in the middle of the woods. I hiked out before noon, didn't stop for lunch, didn't look back. When I got to the trailhead, my phone finally powered on. I had no service, but it showed the time as 3:47 p.m. The date was the same. Nothing skipped. No lost day, no unexplained entries or photos. But when I opened the voice recorder, an app I never used, there was a new file from the night before. It was exactly 1 minute long. I played it. It was blank. No voices, no background sound. Just 1 solid minute of absolute silence. Then it stopped. I deleted it without thinking. I kind of wish I hadn't. I don't know what it meant or how it got there. I haven't gone back to that trail. I still camp sometimes, but only in groups, and I don't use that tent anymore. I gave it to Goodwill a few days later. Not because anything was wrong with it, but because it still smelled faintly like something unfamiliar. Not dirt, not sweat, not plastic. Something colder. Sterile, almost. I've tried to write it off. Maybe I sleepwalked. Maybe I had a weird dream and thrashed around and dragged all my gear in without realizing. But that light, that silence, not being able to hear my own breath, that wasn't a dream. I was awake for that part. I know I was. I was working out of a temporary botany field lab in central Utah. Just me and a generator about 100 miles from the nearest town. Nothing but sandstone and sagebrush for miles. The station sat in a narrow gulch just south of the San Rafael Swell, backed up against a small bluff. The place was meant for one person. Tiny living quarters, attached greenhouse, minimal everything. I was cataloging some genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. Real quiet work. Solitary. That week, the weather had been dry and still. Too still, actually. Not a breeze, not a cloud. The air felt stale, like the whole landscape was holding its breath. My greenhouse windows stayed wide open all day and the air didn't move. Even the insects were sparse. It made the heat sit differently. Heavy, even at night. It started with the soil sensors blinking out. I had 6 of them buried in different corners of the greenhouse. All custom rigged with a little Arduino array I put together myself. They tracked temperature, moisture, and pH, sent the data to my laptop over Wi-Fi every 10 minutes. Worked great until Tuesday morning. I woke up, checked my charts, and saw a 5-hour gap from midnight to just before 5. The whole system had flatlined. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. I thought maybe the Wi-Fi had gone out, but my laptop was still online and the generator hadn't shut off. I double-checked the timestamps. It wasn't a power thing. That afternoon, I opened up the greenhouse and noticed one of the hanging LED grow lights had shorted. The plastic casing was warped. Looked half melted, like someone had taken a blowtorch to the edge of it. It wasn't close enough to any heat source for that to happen naturally. It also wasn't hanging straight anymore. The wires had pulled loose on one side. I replaced it and chalked it up to a freak electrical issue. Maybe the wiring had been bad from the start. The next night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sensor alarm chirping. 3 short beeps, meaning a pH drop below 4.0. That's a serious acid spike and totally unheard of for that soil. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out to the greenhouse. The air was wrong. It smelled like burned dust, not smoke exactly, just scorched minerals. The kind of smell you get when lightning strikes near rock. When I opened the greenhouse door, the humidity hit me like a wave. It wasn't supposed to be humid. I hadn't watered that evening, and it hadn't rained in days. Still, the inside of the glass was fogged. I stepped in and froze. Every single plant had turned. They weren't like that when I went to bed. I checked them myself, did a round with the notepad, checked the roots on the gallium hybrids, misted the ferns. Everything was fine. But now every pot had rotated, not toppled or dragged, turned, as if each one had been gently swiveled in place. All of them were facing inward, toward the center of the greenhouse. There, right where the soil sensors converged, was a bare patch of dirt, just a meter wide. I hadn't planted anything there. I'd left it open for new specimens. The soil was disturbed, not dug up, but pushed down in a smooth, even circle, like something had been resting there. There were no prints, no marks, just a shallow depression, and above it, the glass ceiling was scorched, faint but visible. A black, smoky outline fanned outward in a ring, maybe a foot across. The glass wasn't cracked, but it had spider-webbed faintly in the center of that black mark. The metal framing around it had a shimmer, heat distortion, like it had been warped microscopically. I didn't go any closer. I just backed out of the greenhouse and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the cameras. I had one camera set up in the greenhouse for time-lapse growth tracking. It took a still every 30 seconds and compiled a composite each day. I opened the folder for the previous night and let the video play. The plants were normal until about 12:47 a.m. Then the footage glitched. One frame showed static. After that, the next frame was totally black, and the following one was blank white. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. I looked through the raw stills. Every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted, unreadable, nothing but digital noise. I pulled the card, ran a recovery program. It found 437 images marked as missing or partial. I clicked through the thumbnails. Most were garbage, data fragments. A few showed brief flashes of color, violet, pale green, like the lens had caught a sudden burst of light. One had what looked like a curve of something smooth and metallic in the top right corner. Too blurry to tell. No identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and shut the camera off. I haven't turned it back on since. That day, the plants started acting strange. Some of the gallium leaves curled inward, like they were trying to close around something. The stems on 2 of the wild barley pots bent 90 degrees toward that central bare spot and stayed that way even after I rotated the pots again. I tried moving one of the ferns back to the edge of the bench. Next morning, it was tipped over, facing the center again. On Thursday night, I stayed up, sat in the greenhouse in a chair, flashlight in my lap. I didn't know what I expected to see. Around 1:30, the temperature dropped, fast. I had a thermometer out and watched it fall from 77 degrees Fahrenheit to 61 degrees Fahrenheit in under 5 minutes. Just in the greenhouse, the air felt charged. My hair stood up on my arms. The LED lights flickered, then shut off completely. Then it was quiet. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. The silence was total. No generator, no wind, not even the distant whine of insects. Just stillness. I didn't hear or see anything else. But when I turned my flashlight back on, the bare spot in the center looked darker than before, like the soil had been wet, but it hadn't rained. The plants were tilted again, just slightly. The next morning, I found all 6 of the soil sensors burnt out. The plastic casings were bubbled, and the wires had melted into the dirt. My laptop was fine. Nothing else in the greenhouse was damaged. That was my last day out there. I radioed in, told them I was cutting the trip short due to a hardware malfunction. They didn't question it. Before I left, I scooped a small sample of the soil from the center patch. Brought it back in a sealed jar. It's still on a shelf in my apartment. It dried out over the next few days. The color shifted, started as a dark red, now it's more gray. There's a faint ring around the inside of the glass where the soil doesn't stick, like something pushed outward from the center and left a residue. Sometimes when I walk past it, I swear I can smell that same burned dust. But only for a second. I was working out near White Sands last September, west of Alamogordo. Contract gig through a civilian aerospace company, assisting on a high-altitude weather balloon test. Pretty straightforward setup. Launch, track ascent, collect telemetry, recover payload. I'd done a few already, nothing exciting, just hot, quiet desert work. I was paired with another guy, Rob Lane, ex-Air Force weather tech. He handled most of the equipment. I monitored visuals and GPS. That morning was clear. No clouds, low wind, solid conditions. We got to the site around 5:30 a.m. It's nothing but open scrubland out there, just a few dirt roads and some fencing in the distance. Sun hadn't come up yet, but we had enough light from the horizon to start prepping. I remember how still it was. No birds, no insects buzzing, just the sound of our gear and the occasional crunch of gravel under boots. We launched the balloon at 6:12. It caught the morning light beautifully. The thing gleamed as it drifted up almost motionless for a second and started its slow climb. I logged the time and initial altitude. Everything was smooth. We watched it ascend to about 30,000 feet over the next 40 minutes. Telemetry was steady. Wind speed, temperature, barometric pressure, all normal. Then, right around 6:52, our data feed started acting weird. First it lagged, then froze entirely. The GPS locked up at 31,200 feet. I thought it might be a loose antenna or interference from terrain, but there's nothing out there to block line of sight. It just dropped out. Rob swore a little, started rechecking connections. He rebooted the receiver, toggled the gain settings. I remember him stopping mid-motion and saying, "That's not right." He showed me the waveform on the monitor. There was this repeating static spike across the spectrum, like a pulsing interference pattern. Not random noise either. It was almost rhythmic. We'd both seen signal anomalies before, but this was sharp, regular, and strong. I stepped away to get a clearer view of the sky. Balloon was still visible, a tiny pale dot, drifting up. Then I saw something flash. It shot across the sky, a thin streak of white-blue light from southwest to northeast, just above where the balloon was. It moved so fast I couldn't track it. I blinked, and it was gone. No sound, no trail, nothing. I looked at Rob. "Did you see that?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the monitor like he wasn't hearing me. A few seconds later, the receiver completely shut down. Power was still on, but all data feeds were dead. Rob tried swapping out the tablet we used for logging, but nothing helped. The balloon signal never came back. We stood there for maybe 2 minutes in total silence, scanning the sky. The sun had just broken the horizon, turning everything orange and gold. But up high, where the balloon should have been, there was nothing. No dot, no trail, just open sky. Then we heard this low hum, not mechanical, not like a jet or a drone, more like a tone, deep and smooth, coming from nowhere. It only lasted a few seconds. Not loud. You could have missed it if you weren't listening for something. Rob said, "I think we should pack it in." I didn't argue. We started coiling cables, pulling down the antenna mast. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see something, another flash maybe, or a shadow, but there was nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling something was still up there, just out of sight. As we were stowing the equipment, the air got noticeably still, dead calm. Not a breath of wind. That's rare out there. Usually there's always a breeze. The flag on our truck antenna wasn't even twitching, just flat against the pole like it was glued in place. I checked the portable barometer. Pressure had jumped slightly, which was odd. It usually drops as the day warms up. Rob noticed it too, but didn't say anything. On the drive back, Rob stayed quiet. Normally he'd talk, complain about the heat, crack dumb jokes, but this time, nothing. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror like he expected something to be following us. We got to the base station just before 9. Our supervisor, Jeff, was waiting. We told him the balloon went up fine, but we lost the signal around 30,000 feet and couldn't re-establish. He asked if we wanted to try tracking recovery via the backup beacon. Rob said, "I don't think it's worth it." That surprised me. He was always the one pushing to chase down payloads, even in rough terrain. But he looked pale, like he'd seen something he couldn't explain. I went back out the next day with a different tech, just to sweep the projected drop zone. We found nothing. No parachute, no payload. It should have come down within a 5-mile radius, but it was like it vanished. A week later, I asked Rob if he ever figured out what we saw. He just shook his head and said, "Wasn't a plane, wasn't a satellite, and it sure as hell wasn't weather." That was the last balloon launch I ever did. I was hunting mule deer up near the Tavaputs Plateau last October. Northern Utah, real remote area. I usually go solo, but that weekend my cousin Tyler was supposed to come with. He bailed last minute, something with his kids' school, so I ended up heading out alone. It's not unusual for me. I've done it before. Weather was perfect for it. Cold mornings, clear skies, no fresh snow yet. I set up camp just off a service trail a few miles past where the Forest Service gates off the road. There's an old logging access point I use that's barely visible unless you know where to look. I hiked in Friday evening, pitched my tent, and glassed the ridge a bit before sunset. Nothing exciting that night. I turned in early. Next morning I was up before 5, had coffee over the little stove, and was hiking northeast by first light. The land there is a mix of rocky slopes, pine stands, and little clearings. Good country. Around 7:30, I crossed a small frozen creek and took a narrow game trail that curved up along a ridge. About a quarter mile in, I noticed something weird off to my left, maybe 50 yards down the slope. It looked like a reflection. Not sunlight on snow or ice. This was bright and constant, like metal. I assumed it was trash at first, maybe some idiot left behind a hubcap or a busted cooler. But when I got closer, it was clear this wasn't garbage. There was a sphere, perfectly round, maybe 3 feet in diameter, half buried in the ground at the base of a small rock outcrop. The surface was silver, but not like polished chrome, more like brushed aluminum. Smooth, no seams, no dents or scratches, just there. The weirdest part was the ground around it. The dirt looked undisturbed. No drag marks, no broken branches, no footprints. Not mine, not anyone else's. There was frost on the leaves and the grass nearby, but none on the sphere. It wasn't even cold to the touch. I reached out and laid my hand on it. Warm, not hot. Warmer than the air, anyway. I crouched down, looked for markings. Nothing. No writing, no lights, no indication of what it was. Just this metal orb sitting where it shouldn't be. I spent maybe 15 minutes just circling it, trying to make sense of how it got there. No sign of impact, no crater. It hadn't fallen from above. It looked placed. I thought about trying to move it, but it was lodged too deep in the soil. I nudged it with the toe of my boot. It didn't budge. After a while, I started to feel strange. Not sick, just watched. Like the air around it was heavier, if that makes sense. There were no birds, no wind. My ears felt kind of stuffed, like when you drive up a mountain too fast. I took out my phone to get a picture, and the camera app wouldn't open. I restarted it, but the screen stayed black when I tried again. I checked my GPS app next, and it froze completely. Battery dropped from 76% zero while I watched. Dead. Just like that. I carry a backup battery pack. It didn't work either. I even pulled out my little Garmin unit, which always works out there. It wouldn't boot up. No screen. I remember thinking it must have been a solar flare or something, like though I've never had gear act like that before. After standing there for too long trying to figure it out, I decided to head back. I marked the spot in my mind. Big split pine just up the ridge, rocky outcrop to the west, frost-patched clearing. It wasn't far from camp, maybe a mile and a half. Back at my tent, everything worked fine. Phone turned on, GPS reset, no issues. I even took a picture of the stove to make sure the camera was okay. I thought maybe I'd just hit some weird dead zone, though I'd never run into one like that before. That night, I didn't sleep great, kept waking up and listening. It was dead quiet. No wind, no critters, not even the usual rustling in the brush. The woods just felt paused. I woke up early again Sunday and decided to check the sphere one more time before heading home. I wanted to take a real photo, maybe try digging around it a bit more. When I got back to the spot, it was gone. The clearing was still there, the rock outcrop, the pine, the frost, everything where it should be. But the sphere was just not there anymore. No hole, no tracks, no signs it had ever been there at all. The dirt wasn't disturbed. There was even undisturbed frost right where the base of the sphere had been. It looked like nothing had touched that spot in days. I walked in circles for a while, convinced I was in the wrong place, but I wasn't. I checked the landmarks again and again. Same ridge, same split pine, same angle of the sun. I knew where I was. I just didn't know what had changed. I packed up camp before noon and hiked out faster than usual. Didn't eat breakfast, didn't even make coffee. I kept checking behind me like something was going to step out of the woods. Once I got back to the truck, I drove into Vernal and stayed at a cheap motel. I didn't want to sleep out there again. Since then, I've told exactly 2 people, Tyler and a friend I've hunted with a few times. Neither believed me. Can't blame them. If someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were full of it too. But I know what I saw. I touched it. I still think about how it felt under my hand. Smooth, warm metal in freezing air, like it was waiting for something. I was walking home late one night, just minding my own business. The street was quiet, a little foggy, and the kind of night where everything feels a bit off, but you can't quite say why. As I got near the end of the block, I noticed a black car parked by the curb. It wasn't the car itself that caught my attention. It was what was inside. There were 2 men sitting in the front seats, both wearing black suits and those old-fashioned top hats. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of costume or weird prank, but then I looked closer. Their faces weren't faces. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin, like someone had erased their faces entirely. I froze for a second, then kept walking, faster this time. I tried not to look back, but curiosity got the better of me after a few steps. When I glanced over my shoulder, the car was gone. No lights, no engine sound, no tire marks, nothing. Just the empty street under the fog. I don't know who those men were or what that car was doing there. I've never seen anything like it before or since. It's been bothering me ever since. I don't know why I decided to go out to the old airfield that night. It wasn't anything planned. Just one of those spur-of-the-moment things. The place has been shut down for years, just some cracked runways and empty hangars out near Milltown, a small town in western Kansas. I'd driven past it plenty of times and thought it might be a good spot for shooting the sky at night. There's almost no light pollution out there, so stars are supposed to be crazy bright. I got there around 10 p.m. on a Friday. The wind was light but steady, and the sky was clear, the kind of cold and dry air you get in early spring nights. I had my old camcorder with me, the one I'd used a bunch back in college before phones took over. I set it up on a tripod at the edge of the main runway and started filming the horizon, hoping to catch something interesting, meteors, satellites, airplanes, whatever. I'd been filming for about an hour, just watching the screen and waiting, when I noticed something weird. About halfway up in the sky, there were these lights, slow-moving, kind of pulsing, and they didn't look like planes or helicopters. No blinking red or green, no sound, just these round lights drifting in patterns I couldn't really describe. They moved silently, sometimes flickering, sometimes disappearing completely, and then reappearing a little further away. I wasn't scared at first, more like curious. I started zooming in with the camcorder, trying to get a better look. The lights seemed to keep changing positions, almost like they were watching me back. After a while, I noticed the temperature felt colder, like the air around me was different, but the wind hadn't really changed. That's when I saw the figure. Out of the corner of my eye, something moved behind the rusted chain-link fence that separated the runway from the old service road. It was a man, dressed in a black suit that looked out of place for the middle of nowhere and the middle of the night. No tie, just a black jacket and slacks, standing perfectly still in the shadows. I turned off the camcorder's screen and squinted, trying to get a better look. I called out, "Hey, can I help you?" But the man didn't respond or move. I felt a weird chill go down my spine, but I kept my voice calm. "Are you lost or something?" Then, without a word, the man stepped through the fence. He didn't make any noise climbing over or walking. He just appeared closer, still silent, still expressionless. I held up my camcorder but didn't start recording again. Something about him made me hesitate. He stopped maybe 6 feet away and reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly, he pulled out a single piece of paper and handed it to me. I looked down at it. It was completely blank. No writing, no symbols, nothing. I blinked and looked up, about to ask what the hell this was supposed to mean, but when I looked back, the man was gone. No footprints, no sound, no sign he'd been there at all. I turned back to the sky, but the lights were gone too. The whole sky was empty, like they'd never been there. I stayed out for a while longer, trying to shake off the feeling that I'd just been part of something I didn't understand. When I finally got back in my car, I looked down at the paper again. Still blank. I kept it in my jacket pocket, but it never changed, and I never found anything written on it. Back at home, I checked the footage. The camcorder had recorded everything, the strange lights moving, and then the sudden silence when the man appeared. But there was no sign of the paper or the moment he gave it to me. It was like the camera missed that part completely. I told a couple of friends, but they just laughed it off as a prank or my imagination. Even now, I don't know what I saw or who that man was. I don't think I'll ever go back to that airfield, but sometimes when I'm outside at night, I swear I see lights moving just out of the corner of my eye, watching. It started a couple of weeks ago, just after sunset, on one of those cool, early autumn evenings when the air feels sharp and the sky's clear. I'd been out on the dock by the lake behind my place, just sitting there with my phone, trying to take some pictures of the stars coming out. It was quiet, peaceful, the usual. I was scrolling through my shots when I noticed something strange. Off toward the middle of the lake, just above the water, there was this shape, like a dark silhouette hovering. It wasn't moving like a bird or a plane, it just stayed there, completely still. No blinking lights, no sound, nothing. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or some weird cloud, but the shape was solid, sharp against the sky. I aimed my phone camera at it and zoomed in as best as I could. It was smooth, kind of oval, but it wasn't shiny or reflective, just matte black. I kept watching, and after a few minutes, it slowly began to drift sideways, just a few feet at a time. Then, without any noise or sudden movement, it shot straight up and disappeared into the darkness. I blinked, feeling kind of unnerved, but mostly curious. I wasn't sure what I'd just seen. I stayed out a while longer, but the lake went back to normal. Quiet, empty, just the occasional fish jumping. The next morning, I found a black car parked at the very end of my driveway. It was one of those older models, like from the early 2000s. Nothing flashy, but in perfect condition. Clean, no dents, no license plate. I thought maybe a neighbor's visitor or something. But here's the thing, there were no tire tracks leading up to it, and no footprints anywhere nearby. The gravel looked untouched. I checked the windows, but it was empty. No one inside, no keys in the ignition. I figured someone had parked there overnight and walked away. Maybe the owner was nearby. So I left it alone. The next morning, same thing. Black car, same spot, same no footprints, no tire tracks. I started feeling kind of uneasy, but didn't tell anyone because who'd believe it? By the 4th day, the car was still there every morning. I started leaving a note on the windshield, asking if the owner could move it, but the note never disappeared and the car never moved. It just sat there, silent and black. One evening, a few days later, I was sitting on my porch after dinner, and I heard footsteps on the gravel. I looked up and saw a man standing near the end of the driveway. He was wearing a black suit, nothing fancy but neat, and his face was mostly in shadow from the streetlight. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching me. I got up and walked toward him, kind of nervous. "Can I help you?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a low voice, he said, "The water remembers." I blinked. "What?" he repeated. "The water remembers." Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked away down the road, disappearing into the darkness. I ran inside and locked the door. For the rest of the night, I kept looking out the window, though, but he didn't come back. Over the next week, the car kept appearing every morning, but the man never returned. I started noticing other little things. My phone would sometimes show static or strange glitches when I tried to take pictures of the lake. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear a faint humming sound coming from the water, but when I went outside, it stopped. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. and saw faint lights flickering over the lake. They were different from the first time, a soft blue glow, pulsing slowly. I grabbed my phone and pointed it out the window, but the screen just went black, then showed the camera like it was frozen. When I looked up again, the lights were gone. I haven't seen the man since that night on the porch, and the car stopped showing up too. But sometimes when I'm near the water, I get this feeling like I'm being watched, like something's just below the surface, waiting. And the memory of those words, "the water remembers," keeps playing over and over in my head. I was out on the ridge just after midnight, trying to get some long exposure shots of the Milky Way. I've been into astrophotography for a few years, mostly as a way to get away from everything and just focus on something bigger. This particular night in late October was clear, dry, and cold. The kind of night where the stars really pop. I drove up alone to a spot I'd been scouting for a while, about 20 minutes from my place in northern Vermont. There's a small dirt path leading to a clearing on the ridge, no streetlights for miles, and the sky was perfect. I set up my camera on the tripod, fiddled with the settings, 30-second exposures, ISO 1600, and started shooting. The ridge faced east, so I was trying to catch the movement of the stars trailing around Polaris. Everything looked normal at first. I was using an old film camera, a Canon AE1 with some expired Kodak Ektachrome that I found at a thrift store. I like shooting film sometimes because it forces you to slow down and be patient. After about an hour of shooting, I packed up and headed home. When I got back to my little apartment, I started developing the film in the dark room on campus the next morning. I'm a photography major, so the department has a lab that's open pretty much 24/7. The darkroom is this cramped basement space with concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights, plus all the usual chemicals and trays. I like it down there, quiet and oddly comforting. I pulled the first few strips out and hung them to dry. The star trails looked great. Then I noticed something weird on one roll. There were these sharp geometric streaks in the sky, like lines and angles, cutting across the star trails above the ridge. They weren't random. They looked deliberate, like patterns someone had drawn in light. The shapes didn't match anything I'd seen before, and they definitely weren't from airplanes or satellites. I looked at the negatives under the light again, blinking a few times, thinking maybe it was a scratch or a processing error. I decided to print a few of those frames and took the sheets into the enlarger. The shapes got even stranger when blown up. Triangles, diamonds, even what looked like a hexagon, all glowing faintly white, almost like light beams, but static and sharp-edged. The rest of the stars were blurred from the exposure, but these shapes stayed sharp and rigid. I showed the prints to my friend Claire, who's also in photography. She said it looked like some kind of light graffiti or maybe a glitch in the film. I agreed it was probably a weird artifact, but it stuck with me. I went back to the ridge the next night, but the sky was cloudy and I didn't get a chance to try again. A few days later, I went to the darkroom to get more prints made. The room was empty except for the janitor, this older guy named Mr. Carver. I said hi, and he looked at me with a strange expression, like he was holding something back. I didn't think much of it. When I reached into my locker to grab the negatives and prints, I noticed some of the prints were missing, the ones with the geometric streaks. Not just one or two, but the entire set. I asked Mr. Carver if he'd seen them. He hesitated, and then said, "Some men came by here a couple of nights ago after hours. They were wearing suits. Black suits. Real official looking." I nodded slowly, but he went on. "They asked me some strange questions about lights, about long exposures, about capturing things that weren't supposed to be captured. I didn't know what to tell them." I froze for a second. What did they want? They just wanted to know if anyone had been down here, taking photos of the sky. Said something about too much light and things better left unseen. I don't think they liked the idea of people poking around. I thanked him and left, but the feeling in my gut didn't go away. I kept checking the lab every day after that, but no new prints showed up. My negatives were still there, untouched. Then, one night, while walking back from the campus library, I saw a black sedan parked under a street lamp a block from my apartment. There were two men inside, dressed in dark suits. They didn't get out. As I passed, their headlights briefly flickered, and I swear I caught a glimpse of one of them watching me. I hurried home and locked every door and window. Over the next week, strange things kept happening. My phone battery would drain fast, even though I barely used it. I'd catch flickers of movement outside my window, but when I looked, there was nothing. Once, while driving home late, my headlights briefly dimmed and then returned to normal. I stopped going to the ridge for a while. I didn't tell anyone else, not even Claire. One afternoon, I got an email on my school account. No subject. Just the sentence. "You've seen too much light lately." It was from an address I didn't recognize. I replied asking who it was, but got no answer. That night, I thought I saw a shadow standing outside my apartment. When I looked closer, it vanished. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the streetlight. Eventually, I moved all my negatives and prints to a safer place, just in case. I never saw those men in black again, but I always felt like someone was watching, waiting. I still don't know what those shapes were on my film, or why those men showed up, but I stopped photographing the night sky after that. It didn't feel right anymore. I worked as a night security guard at the Mount Kelsey Observatory for almost 3 years. It's this remote facility about 40 miles outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, up on a ridge surrounded by pine trees. Pretty much the only building for miles, which made it perfect for the kind of telescopes they had. I liked the quiet out there. It was peaceful, a good place to clear my head. My shifts ran from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., and most nights were uneventful. Just me patrolling the grounds, checking the perimeter, and watching for trespassers or wildlife. The night it happened, it was clear and cold, maybe mid-October. The moon was just a sliver in the sky, barely lighting the dark around the observatory. I was on my usual rounds around midnight when I noticed something unusual. Over the east ridge, not far from the facility, there were two bright spheres hovering silently. They weren't flashing or blinking like planes or drones. Just steady, intense lights, glowing with a kind of pale blue-white color. At first, I thought maybe someone was messing around with spotlights or lanterns, but the spheres didn't move erratically and they weren't attached to anything I could see. They hovered side by side, about 50 feet apart, just above the tree line. I grabbed my flashlight and my binoculars, trying to get a better look. The spheres stayed perfectly still for nearly 5 minutes, just floating there without a sound. I radioed the control room inside the observatory just to report something strange on the east side. They told me to keep an eye on it, but not to approach. I stayed where I was, watching the spheres. Then slowly, without any noise or shift in position, they started to rise. Maybe 20 feet, then 30, higher and higher, until they disappeared into the sky, moving straight up, faster than any helicopter or drone I'd ever seen. Within seconds, they were gone. I spent the rest of my shift jumping between the cameras on the property and walking the grounds, looking for anything that might explain what I'd just seen. Nothing. No footprints, no vehicles, no signs of anyone being near the ridge. I wrote up my report as usual when I clocked out, trying not to sound crazy. I was just describing two bright lights that hovered silently and then vanished. The next morning, when I got to the office, my manager, Jeff, was waiting for me. He wasn't his usual easygoing self. Instead, he looked tense and kind of guarded. "Morning, Mark," he said, but he was watching the door behind me like he expected someone to come in any second. Before I could ask what was up, two men walked in. Both were dressed in black suits, sharp and clean, and they carried themselves with this kind of cold, calm authority. Jeff said, "These gentlemen are with Homeland Security. They're here to talk to you about your report." The agents didn't introduce themselves. No names, no badges with names, just these thick metal badges with numbers. One was 0473, the other 8921. I noticed their eyes the moment they looked at me. It's hard to explain, but their eyes never blinked. Not once. They stared straight ahead, unblinking, like they weren't quite human. Or maybe like they didn't want to show anything at all. They asked me the same questions I'd already answered in my report. What I saw, when, if I'd noticed anything else unusual around the observatory. I stuck to the facts, the spheres, how they moved, the silence, how I couldn't find any explanation. They didn't write anything down, but just nodded, occasionally exchanging looks between themselves. Jeff hovered nearby, but didn't say much. After maybe 20 minutes, the agents left without any explanation or instructions. Before they went out the door, I overheard one of them say something about restricted airspace and non-conventional aerial phenomena, but it was just a whisper. After they left, I tried to shake off the weird feeling that settled over me. The rest of that day felt off. The cameras showed static at odd times, like the feed was interrupted for brief moments, and every time I glanced at Jeff, he avoided eye contact, like he knew something I didn't. That night I worked again, hoping things would feel normal. But as I walked the perimeter, I noticed the same two spheres again. They were in the exact same spot, hovering silently. This time, though, I wasn't alone. Behind me, I heard a low hum, almost like electricity. The forest around the observatory felt stiller than usual. No wind, no rustling of leaves, no distant wildlife noises. It was like the entire area was holding its breath. I stopped, looking toward the spheres, but when I blinked, one of them seemed to flicker for a split second, almost like it was glitching. The thought made my stomach twist. I'd never seen anything like it. The spheres rose again, this time moving slowly toward the observatory itself. I radioed in to warn the control room, but the static was louder than ever, and my voice came out all crackled. The lights hovered over the main telescope dome for maybe 10 minutes, then vanished without a trace. I couldn't sleep that day or the next. The strange thing was the agents never came back. Jeff said nothing more about them, but after that night, the spheres stopped appearing. Still, I kept feeling watched. At work, the security cameras occasionally caught something moving just out of frame. Too fast to be a person, too vague to be an animal. I started noticing odd little things around the observatory, like faint footprints leading nowhere or small patches of scorched grass by the equipment sheds. I told Jeff, but he just shrugged, saying it could be animals or people messing around. Still, the unease stuck with me. Weeks passed, and eventually the place felt normal again. But I never forgot those eyes. The agents who didn't blink, the spheres that hovered silently in that strange stillness in the forest. I kept working the night shifts, but every time the wind died down and the sky went completely quiet, I wondered if the spheres might come back. I don't have answers, just a bunch of moments I can't explain. And I guess that's enough to keep me looking over my shoulder every once in a while. I was on the dock just after midnight, filming. The lake was flat, the kind of still that swallows sound whole. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air had that damp, heavy feeling you get right before rain starts. I was waiting for those lights to show up again, the weird ones I'd noticed the past few nights. My name's Lisa Moreno, by the way. I live in a small cabin on the outskirts of Ashford, Washington. It's about as close to the wilderness as you can get without completely disappearing from the map. I've always been the kind of person who likes to record stuff, weird stuff, strange things that don't add up. It's a hobby, or maybe an obsession. Anyway, those lights first appeared last week. I was out here, just messing around with my phone's camera, when these faint glimmers started flickering over the water, moving in patterns that didn't match anything natural. No planes, no bats, no fireflies. They looked like small orbs just hovering and then zipping didn't make sense. I figured I'd catch them on video and maybe post it somewhere later. Not to prove anything, I'm not that delusional, but just because it was strange. That night, I got some footage. The lights pulsed in a loose circle above the lake, sometimes darting up and down in a way that looked almost deliberate. No noise, just pure silence. The next morning, I showed the clips to my friend Jamie over coffee. He's more into hiking than weird stuff, but he nodded thoughtfully and said, "Maybe it's a drone or something." I thought that was possible, but the movements didn't feel mechanical, and drones don't usually hide in the fog like that. The nights after, I kept coming back, hoping to get better footage, maybe figure out what they were. Then things started feeling off. The first odd thing was the power flicker. It was subtle. One night, while I was editing the video on my laptop, the lights dimmed, then went out completely for about 10 seconds. Just my cabin, though. The whole street was fine. When the power came back, the laptop had frozen. It hadn't been plugged in, so the battery was fine. Just weird. I shrugged it off. Maybe a glitch. Then I noticed my phone acting strange. Battery draining faster than usual. GPS would shut off randomly, or the compass spun like crazy. It happened mostly around the lake. The night before the incident, I decided to sleep early. I was tired and figured I'd skip the usual late-night stakeout. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound at the door. I don't usually lock the porch door because it's screened, and no one ever comes around here at night, but this time I had. The sound wasn't a knock, exactly. More like a soft, dragging shuffle on the wooden porch. I got up, heart pounding, and peeked through the peephole. There was a man standing there. He was dressed in black, from head to toe, jacket, pants, boots. No hat, no gloves. His face was in shadow, but I could tell he was looking right at the door. He wasn't holding anything obvious, just standing still like a statue. I didn't open the door, I just whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. I was about to call 911 when I noticed something on the porch floor. The man had dropped something, a photo. I cracked the door open just enough to reach down and pick it up. It was faded, yellowed at the edges, like it had been in a wallet for years. I looked at it, then looked back up. The man was gone. No footsteps in the dirt, no sign he'd walked away. The photo was of me. Not recent, though. It was a picture of me as a kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old. I'm standing in a park, smiling, wearing that blue jacket my mom bought me that winter. I turned the photo over. Nothing written on the back. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I showed the photo to Jamie. He looked at it closely. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I told him what happened. He frowned. "That's unsettling." We both agreed not to tell anyone else. I was already feeling a little crazy. For the next few days, I kept watching for the man, but he never came back. I kept noticing strange things, though. My phone would light up with calls from unknown numbers. Never answered, never leaving a message. Lights on the lake still flickered, but now I felt like I was being watched, even when I was inside the cabin. One evening, I heard a soft tapping on the window, but when I looked, nothing was there. I started carrying a flashlight and pepper spray whenever I went outside, just in case. I don't know if the man was connected to the lights or the weird glitches. I don't know why he had that photo or what he wanted to tell me. All I know is, after that night, I started paying attention to things I hadn't before. The way the fog rolls in too quickly, the way the power sometimes blinks in half a house, the quiet moments when the world feels paused, like it's holding its breath. Sometimes when I look out over the lake at night, I think I see shapes moving just beyond the trees. And the photo, it's still on my desk right next to my camera. I haven't shown it to anyone else. Not yet. I was driving back to California after helping my sister move to Austin. I didn't want to blow money on a motel, and I've always been fine crashing in my truck if I need to. I was somewhere along Route 62, not far from 29 Palms, but still a good ways out. I'd been on the road for hours and figured I'd stop for the night once I got past the last gas station in Parker. It was late, probably close to 1:30 in the morning when I pulled off onto a dirt shoulder. No lights around, no other cars, just that wide-open Mojave night. Stars overhead, dry air, that low hum of nothing. I left the driver's window cracked a few inches and shut off the engine. Rolled my hoodie into a pillow, reclined the seat back, and knocked out pretty fast. I don't know what time I woke up, but it was still dark. The sky had that early pre-dawn feel, like it was technically morning, but the sun hadn't shown up yet. What got me wasn't a sound or movement, it was this feeling, like I just surfaced from a weird dream I couldn't remember, and something wasn't right. At first, I thought maybe my phone had gone off or something, but the cab was quiet. No buzzing, no headlights, no passing cars. I sat up a little and looked around. That's when I noticed all the windows were fogged, every single one of them. Front windshield, side windows, even the tiny triangle in the back. But it wasn't the kind of fog you get from breathing in a closed car. It was thick and smeared, like someone had taken a wet rag and wiped every window from the outside. I blinked a few times and just stared at it, trying to process. The air outside was dry as bone when I'd parked. No humidity, no dew, no condensation. It didn't make any sense. I leaned forward and wiped a spot on the inside of the windshield with my sleeve. Clear. The fog wasn't inside, it was all on the outside. That put a weird pit in my stomach. I reached for the dome light, but hesitated. Something about flipping it on felt wrong, like I didn't want to see what might be outside. I stayed still and kept quiet, listening. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine. Not even wind. Just silence. I finally cracked the door open, slow. The air hit me right away, cold and dry. Definitely not damp enough for that kind of condensation. I stepped out and closed the door gently behind me. The ground was hard-packed dirt and gravel, not a trace of moisture anywhere. I walked a slow circle around the truck, checking the windows. The fogging was even, smudged like it had been wiped with cloth or a hand, long swipes in wide arcs. Some spots had streaks, like fingers had dragged across them. Not like a person trying to look in, more like someone trying to clean them. That's what it looked like someone had tried to clean the windows from the outside in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert. I crouched down and looked under the truck. Nothing there. No footprints, no marks in the dirt. I don't know what I was expecting, but it felt too quiet, too still. I climbed back in and locked the doors. The smell in the truck seemed different then, too. Not bad, just off. Like old copper or ozone, faint but there. I didn't remember it when I fell asleep. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see movement behind me. But the road was empty. I turned the key and the truck started up fine. Headlights lit up the dirt and low shrubs ahead. I put it in drive and pulled back onto the road without really thinking about it. I drove for about 5 minutes before I noticed something else. The radio display had reset, time, presets, everything. Like the battery had been disconnected. I hadn't touched it. I checked my phone next. The clock was weird. It said 5:42 a.m., but the sky didn't look right for that. I mean, it was still dark, like before dawn dark, not the early light kind of 5:42. I figured maybe I just lost track of time or the mountains were blocking the sun, but it didn't sit right. Another thing, I'd only meant to nap for a couple hours. Maybe 3, tops. I'd parked around 1:30, and the last time I looked at my phone was 1:47 a.m., right before I dozed off. If it really was 5:42, that meant nearly 4 hours had gone by. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like I just blinked. I made it to 29 Palms a little after 6. The sun was finally up by then. I stopped at a gas station, got a coffee, and used the bathroom. While I was washing my hands, I checked my face in the mirror and saw this thin red mark across my neck, almost like a pressure line from a tight seatbelt, but it was higher, near my jaw. I hadn't been wearing anything tight, just a hoodie, no collar. That's when it all started to really get to me. The fogged windows, the wiped glass, the smell, the time weirdness, the radio. None of it added up. I kept trying to find normal explanations. Maybe someone messed with the truck while I was asleep. Maybe I just slept longer than I thought. Maybe the battery glitched. But I've slept in that truck plenty of times, in different places. I've never seen the windows fogged like that, and definitely not in the desert with no humidity, no breath inside, and no sign of anything around me. I drove straight home that day, didn't stop except for gas. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I checked every inch of the truck again. No damage, no missing stuff, but that faint metallic smell was still there, clinging to the fabric, even with the windows rolled down most of the way home. The next night, I dreamed about a light. Not a shape, not a ship, just a bright white light, close and soundless, hanging above me. I don't know if it was really a dream or something left over from that night, but I haven't slept in the truck since. I was camped out in the Nevada desert, just south of Beatty, near an old gravel road that branches off into the hills. I'd been out there before a few times, mostly for the quiet. It's one of those places where you can sit outside at night and hear nothing at all, not even wind if it's calm enough. This was late April, so the nights were cool but not freezing, and the sky was perfectly clear. I got out there around 6 p.m. and set up camp in a little flat area tucked between some low rock formations. Nothing fancy, just a small two-person tent, sleeping bag, cooler, and my pack. No fire since I didn't want to draw attention, and I had a jet boil if I needed anything hot. I had cell signal when I parked, but once I hiked in about a mile, that dropped off fast. I spent the evening hiking a short ridge nearby and got back to camp right around sunset. Ate a granola bar and some jerky, then climbed into my sleeping bag around 10. I don't usually sleep straight through out there. The desert gets cold and your back starts to feel every rock under the ground pad. But that night, I was out hard. No dreams, no tossing around, just blackness. Then I woke up. No real reason. Just that dead silence you snap into sometimes, like your brain knows something's off before you're even fully awake. I checked my phone for the time, 4:13 a.m. Battery was fine. I tapped the GPS app I always use when I'm solo hiking, just to check where I was. It took a second to load, then showed my coordinates. Only they weren't where I set up camp. It said I was roughly 2 miles northeast of where I'd parked. At first I figured maybe I didn't mark the original spot properly, so I closed the app and reopened it. Same result. I checked my downloaded offline map. It had my previous saved pins, including one I'd dropped that night when I set up. That pin was still there, and my blue dot was nowhere near it. I sat up, unzipped the tent, and looked around. Same rocks, same flat stretch, same little Joshua tree I'd tied a reflective marker to. Nothing had changed. The tent hadn't moved. My boots were still sitting just outside the flap where I left them. I checked for tracks in the dirt. Nothing but mine from the day before. The surface was soft, that fine, dusty gravel that shows every step. No drag marks, no tire treads, no animal prints. Just stillness. I stepped outside barefoot and did a slow circle with my flashlight. The air was perfectly still. No wind. The stars looked the same, maybe a little lower in the sky since it was closer to dawn, but nothing else out of place. I walked out a few yards, checking for anything, any signs that someone had come through or moved my gear. Nothing. I pulled my boots on and opened my GPS again. The dot was still there, 2 miles northeast of my pin. I tried using the compass function to backtrack in case I'd messed up and just camped in a similar looking spot without realizing. But the direction I'd walked from the truck wasn't northeast. It was west, slightly northwest. That much I was sure of. At some point, I stopped trying to make sense of it and just stood there listening, and I realized how loud the quiet was. No crickets, no wind, not even the distant hum of the highway you can usually hear if you really listen. Just total silence. Then there was a sound, not close, but high up, a faint pulsing hum. It didn't seem to be coming from one direction, more like it was overhead, but too soft to pinpoint. I turned off my flashlight and looked up. Nothing but stars. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, waiting for something to move or flash or make a clearer noise, but it never did. The hum faded gradually, like it was slipping away, not getting quieter. That probably doesn't make sense, but that's the only way I can describe it. Eventually, I climbed back into the tent, still fully dressed, and just sat there with the light off. Every now and then, I'd check my GPS again. Same position. No movement. My tent hadn't moved an inch, but according to every map, I was in a completely different spot. Around 5:30, the sky started to lighten. I finally stepped out and walked up one of the little ridges nearby to get a better look. From there, I could see the road where I'd parked the truck the night before, and I was nowhere near it. The land didn't match what I'd seen coming in. I should have been facing the ridge I hiked at sunset, but it was gone. This place had similar features, but they weren't in the same layout. I packed up quickly, trying to stay calm. It took me nearly 2 hours to get back to the road, following the GPS route manually until I spotted my truck from a distance. It was parked exactly where I left it. When I got home, I checked the coordinates again on a full map. The spot I'd woken up in wasn't close enough to my camp to be explained by just wandering in the dark, and there were no trails, no service roads, nothing between the 2 points, just open desert. I don't camp in that area anymore. I don't really have a reason. It's not like anything threatened me or chased me off. But something about that night felt like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Or maybe I was supposed to be there, and that's worse. And I was hiking with my buddy Kevin near Fort Huachuca, down in southern Arizona. This was last March, early spring. The weather was perfect, cool in the shade, warm in the sun. We'd been out a few times that season, but this trail was new to us. It was just outside the restricted zone, technically public land, but pretty remote. Kevin's the type who likes to get close to fences and see what kind of signs he can spot. He doesn't mess with them, just likes the vibe, I guess. We parked off a dirt service road around 10:30 in the morning, hiked in maybe 3 miles before we stopped for lunch. No cell service, which was expected. Kevin had downloaded offline maps, and I had a Garmin for backup. We were sitting on this rocky ridge overlooking a long wash. The land was empty. Just chaparral, low brush, and the occasional mesquite. You could see clear out to the Dragoon Mountains on one side and the base perimeter way off to the other. At some point after lunch, we noticed it had gotten really quiet. No wind, no bugs. That wasn't too weird. It happens sometimes when the sun's high, but the air felt weirdly thick. I don't know how else to say it. Like that moment before a monsoon, only the sky was clear. We were packing up when my Garmin screen went black. Kevin looked up and said, "My phone just died." I thought he meant battery died, but he still had like 80%. He pressed the power button and nothing happened. My Garmin wouldn't respond either. We pulled out our backup phones. Kevin carries an old flip phone for emergencies, and even that was dead. No power, no flicker, no restart logo. Like the batteries were just gone. We stood there for a while, just kind of confused. No electronics were working. We tried our watches, dead. My little pocket flashlight, nothing. Kevin even pulled out his camera, an old Nikon he brings sometimes. Wouldn't turn on. Then we heard this low sound. Not loud, barely audible, but deep. It wasn't wind or a plane. It felt more like pressure than noise. A low hum that came in waves. I asked Kevin if he felt it or heard it, and he just nodded. We didn't move. I don't know why. I think we were both trying to stay calm, like we were waiting for it to stop. It did, maybe 5 or 6 minutes later. Just gone. Almost immediately after, Kevin's phone buzzed. Then my Garmin lit up. Everything just came back like normal. We both kind of laughed it off at first, like maybe it was solar interference or something. We checked our phones, time was correct, battery percentage hadn't changed, but there were some new photos in Kevin's gallery. He was the one who noticed. We were standing there looking at his phone, and he said, "I didn't take these." There were 8 photos, all time-stamped between 12:41 and 12:46, which matched the window when everything was off. The first few were just blurry shots of the sky, totally out of focus, angled weird, like the phone had been tilted upward but not pointed directly overhead. Then one showed Kevin. Kind of. His shoulder, part of his neck, like someone was taking a picture from behind him at a downward angle. Then there was a picture of the dirt, just dirt and a bit of my boot. Then one that showed us both, from a distance. It was a wide shot. We were standing maybe 15 feet apart, looking in opposite directions. Kevin was adjusting his backpack, and I had my hands on my hips. It looked like it had been taken from slightly above, like from a hill or something. But there was nothing like that nearby. There were no shadows from whoever or whatever took it. I checked my own phone and saw 3 new photos there too. They were less clear, but the last one was a shot of Kevin walking ahead of me. Only I don't remember that happening. The trail in the picture curved left through a narrow canyon. I swear we never went that way. We stood there going through our galleries trying to piece it together. The timestamps made sense, but the photos didn't. We weren't moving during that time. Neither of us had the phones out. Kevin got really quiet. He zoomed in on one of the sky shots. In the upper left corner, there was a small white smudge. At first, I thought it was lens flare, but it had shape to it. Not sharp, more like an oval, but vertical and just barely off-center. We tried to take pictures of the same patch of sky, hoping to match the angle or spot. Nothing lined up. We checked the metadata for the photos. Everything looked normal, except the GPS tags. They were blank. Every other photo from the trip had coordinates, even the ones taken earlier that morning. These ones just had empty fields where the location should have been. We didn't stay much longer after that. We started back the way we came and didn't talk for a while. Halfway back, I glanced down at my Garmin. It showed we were half a mile east of where we should have been, like we drifted. but the terrain looked the same. I stopped and tried to line up our trail on the map with the wash we'd walked along earlier. Something was off. The scrub patterns, the layout of the rocks, it looked close but not quite right. We eventually reached the car, and everything from that point on was normal. Phone worked, car started fine, no new photos. Later that night, Kevin called me. He said he tried uploading the weird photos to his laptop, but the files wouldn't transfer. They'd open on the phone, but not on the computer. He tried emailing one to me, but the attachment failed every time. Same thing when I tried. Even screenshots wouldn't send. The moment I attached one, the messaging app would crash. Eventually, we just gave up. The next weekend, we went back to the same trailhead. We hiked the same path, tried to find the exact spot where it happened. We couldn't. The ridge was there and the wash, but nothing looked exactly like it had. It felt like we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. Only the GPS trail said we hadn't. The photos are still on my phone. I stopped trying to send them. Every once in a while, I look at that one of us standing apart with no one else in frame. I never remember standing like that. And I don't know who took it. I was sitting on the porch that night with a beer, same as I had probably 100 times before. It was one of those clear, quiet nights where everything's still, like the world's holding its breath. No wind, no bugs, just the sound of my old dog shifting around on the porch boards beside me and the creak of the rocking chair. I've always liked looking at the stars. Not in any big poetic way or anything, I just like the calm of it. I live out in the country, no real light pollution. So on a good night, the whole sky's laid out, bright enough you can see the faint edge of the Milky Way. That night was one of the better ones, crisp and clean, cool enough to keep the mosquitoes away, warm enough to not need a jacket. I didn't even have the porch light on. I remember I was just zoning out, watching the sky the way you do when your mind's not on anything. A few satellites were passing overhead, those slow, steady crawlers that go in a straight line, same speed, all the way through. Planes too, up high with their blinking reds and whites. I know the difference. I'm not one of those people who sees something weird in the sky and immediately jumps to wild conclusions. But then I noticed something off. It was just one star, off to the left, maybe a few inches above the horizon from my angle. Bright, but not the brightest. At first, I didn't think anything of it. But then I noticed it was moving. Not fast, just a slow, steady drift, right to left, sideways across the sky. Not down, not up, just straight across. And it wasn't twinkling like the other stars. It held this steady, cold kind of glow, like a headlight way off in the distance. Pale white. I watched it for a full minute, just trying to make sense of it. My first thought was maybe a satellite at a weird angle, or maybe one of those high-altitude weather balloons. But it wasn't shaped like anything. No outline, no color shift, no blinking, just that little white dot sliding sideways where nothing should have been moving like that. Then it stopped. It didn't slow to a stop. It just stopped. Midair, like a cursor on a screen. It hovered there for maybe 10 seconds, and then it blinked out. Not faded, blinked, gone. Like someone hit a switch or deleted it. I actually rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired or not seeing things right. I scanned the area around where it had been, but there was nothing. Just black sky and stars still twinkling like normal. No cloud cover, no light flashes, no sound. I waited a few minutes, but it didn't come back. It wasn't until I stood up and stretched that I realized how quiet it had gotten. The dog wasn't moving anymore. He was sitting straight up, ears forward, staring out into the dark field past the fence. I called his name, but he didn't look at me. Just stayed locked in, like he was watching something I couldn't see. I didn't see anything out there at first, just the tall grass swaying a little. But when I looked harder, I realized the grass wasn't moving the same way it had been earlier. It wasn't blowing in the wind, it was shifting like something was moving through it. Low to the ground. I couldn't hear footsteps or rustling, just this very faint, swaying pattern that looked like it was being disturbed from underneath. I grabbed the flashlight from the table by the door and clicked it on. The beam didn't reach far, but enough to light up the first 20 feet of the yard. The grass looked normal under the beam, but when I moved it toward the fence, I thought I saw something duck down. something quick, like a head or shoulder dropping low. The dog finally barked once, loud and sharp, then went quiet again. I kept the flashlight pointed toward where I'd seen the movement, but nothing came up. No animals, no person, nothing. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just watching. The weirdest part was how wrong everything felt. Not scary, exactly, just off. Like the timing of the world was a little broken. I didn't even notice at first that the air had this low buzzing sound to it. Not like an engine, more like a phone vibrating on a table. Real low, barely there, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. Eventually the dog relaxed. He laid back down like nothing happened. I turned off the flashlight and sat again, but I didn't drink the rest of the beer, just held it, watching the stars. That light never came back. I figured that'd be the end of it, but the next night I went back out to the porch again, mostly just curious if I'd see it happen again. Same setup, same time, same clear sky. I stared at the same spot where the thing had blinked out, but there was nothing unusual. After maybe an hour, I gave up and headed back inside. But right as I shut the door, I heard a sound. Not loud, more like something brushing up against the house from the outside. A kind of soft scraping, like a branch dragging across the siding. I waited, listening. It came again, this time closer to the kitchen window. I went to the window, but kept the lights off. Pulled the curtain back just a little and peeked out. Nothing. I opened the door real slow and stepped out onto the porch again. The dog came with me, tail down, ears back. He didn't bark this time, just stayed right by my side, staring off toward the back of the house. I walked around, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the wall and down to the grass. Still nothing. No animal tracks, no broken branches, no wind. But when I came around the far side of the house, something made me stop. There was a spot on the lawn where the grass was flattened, just a perfect circle, maybe 4 feet across. Not burnt, not discolored, just pressed down like something heavy had settled there. I touched the ground with my hand. The soil wasn't wet, but it felt cold, way colder than the air around it. I backed away, shining the flashlight around, but still, nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every sound outside kept me on edge. I kept thinking about that star blinking out, the grass, the movement near the fence, the buzzing. None of it added up. For the next week or so, I didn't sit on the porch. Just didn't feel right. But I still looked at the sky through the window sometimes. Never saw that light again. But a couple nights later, I did wake up to something strange. The digital clock by my bed was flashing like we'd lost power, but nothing else in the house was off. The fridge was humming, the porch light was still on, only the clock was reset. I checked my phone for the time, and it was 3:42 a.m. I got up, just to make sure everything was fine. The dog was at the back door again, alert, staring out into the dark. I flipped on the back porch light and looked out, and for a second, I swear I saw something standing at the edge of the trees, just tall and still. No features, just a shape. And then it stepped backward and vanished behind the tree line. I stood there for a long time before going back to bed. I didn't sleep after that. I haven't told many people about it. A couple friends, maybe. No one really knows what to say. And I don't know what to say either. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't drinking that much. It just happened. And I've been watching the sky a lot more since. We were out on the lake late that night, just me and Jake, like we did most weekends when we wanted to get away from everything. It was one of those quiet, still nights where water looks like glass and the stars are so bright they almost feel close enough to reach. We had the little motorboat anchored a good distance from shore, lines in the water, just waiting for a bite. Nothing big planned, just fishing and talking, maybe catching some bass or catfish. The night was cold, but not freezing. I had a jacket on, Jake too. We sat on the back bench, each with a rod in hand. The only sound was the occasional plop when a bobber moved or a fish took a nibble. The boat creaked softly in the water, and the gentle ripple from our movements spread out around us. After a while, Jake went quiet, just staring out over the water behind the boat. I looked too, thinking maybe he saw something, maybe a bird or a fish jumping. Then we both heard it, a splash. It was sudden and heavy, like something big hitting the water hard right behind us. But here's the thing. There was no ripple. Nothing spread out on the surface. Just silence except for that weird splash noise. It was like the water had made the sound without moving. That didn't make sense. I looked over my shoulder and scanned the dark water. No wake, no movement. The surface was still perfectly smooth. Jake said, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, feeling a little uneasy. We both stayed still, waiting, expecting maybe to see something break the water. Then came this low droning sound, coming from beneath the boat. It wasn't like any engine noise or the usual hum of insects or the wind. It was deep and steady, almost like a vibration you could feel through your bones. It didn't get louder or softer, just stayed there, this constant low buzz under the water. I asked Jake if he heard it. He nodded again, eyes wide now. We didn't say much after that, both just listening. The droning went on for several minutes. It didn't seem to be coming from any direction. It was just under us. I looked back toward shore, but it was too dark to see much beyond the tree line. The moon had slipped behind clouds, so the lake looked endless and black. The only light came from the little flashlight Jake had on the side of the boat. I shone it over the water, trying to catch any movement, but nothing showed up. After maybe 5 minutes, the droning stopped suddenly. No fade out, no gradual decrease, just cut off. The silence felt even heavier afterward. I told Jake to pull up the lines and start heading back. Neither of us said why, but I think we both wanted to get out of there. As Jake fired up the motor, the water around the boat stayed unnervingly still. No wakes, no splashes from the propeller, nothing. Usually, even the smallest movement would stir something up, but the lake just sat there, like it was holding its breath. We headed back slowly, neither of us talking much. The boat's motor was the only sound, but the water didn't respond as I expected. It didn't ripple or splash against the hull. I was watching the water more than the path ahead, trying to make sense of the quiet. At one point, Jake asked if I felt anything strange, like a presence or being watched. I said yeah, but it was hard to explain. It wasn't fear exactly, more like something was out there in the water or just below the surface. Something that didn't want us to notice it, but also didn't want to be ignored. About halfway back to shore, the boat's GPS screen flickered and went blank for a few seconds. That's when I really started to feel uneasy. It came back on with no problem, but the little glitch made the whole situation feel even more off. We made it to the dock without incident, and when I stepped onto the wooden planks, the familiar creak of the boards felt like a relief. The night air seemed less heavy there, and the lake looked normal again, reflecting the moonlight and stars without any weird silence or strange noises. Jake and I packed up quietly, neither of us eager to talk about what had happened. On the way home, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see some light or shape following us, but there was nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that splash in my head and the low drone vibrating under the boat like it was still there waiting. I haven't been back out to that part of the lake since. Not sure if I'll go again anytime soon. I was camped about 30 miles west of Marfa, Texas, on BLM land. Just flat, dry country out there, scrub brush, hard pan dirt, and not much else. I'd parked my truck off a 2-track road and hiked a half-mile out with my gear. No one around. That was kind of the point. I'd done a dozen solo camping trips like that, mostly out in the desert. No cell service, no noise, no lights. I slept in a one-man tent with a mesh roof so I could see the stars. Brought plenty of water, a little food, and a satellite phone just in case. That night it had been dry and windy, same as always. The wind had kicked up around sundown, but it died down after dark. I stayed up a while, just watching the sky. You could see the Milky Way clear as anything, and there were a couple meteors early on. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No bugs, no coyotes, nothing moving, just me and the wind. I fell asleep a little after 11, woke up sometime later, couldn't say when. No watch, and my phone was powered off in my pack to save battery, but it was still dark, pitch dark, the kind that presses on your eyes. At first, I didn't notice anything wrong, just thought the stillness was weird. No breeze anymore, not even a rustle from the brush. Dead calm. Then I sat up and realized it was too quiet. Usually in the desert at night, you hear at least something, an owl, a far-off dog, even your own heartbeat. But this was like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. No sound at all. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and unzipped the tent. The beam caught the dirt outside, and I froze. There was a ring. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, centered right on my tent. The ground inside the circle looked darker than the rest, like it had been burned. The scrub grass and brush were completely gone, just bare, blackened earth. But there was no smell, no heat. I touched the dirt with my hand, and it was cold, dry and packed hard, like the heat had never been there, like something had erased everything that used to be in that spot. I stood up and turned in a slow circle, checking for footprints or tire tracks or anything. Nothing. The rest of the desert was untouched. My truck was parked way off to the east, just a faint shadow in the distance. I walked to the edge of the ring. The line was sharp, like it had been drawn with a compass. On one side, the usual mix of pale dirt, thorny brush, and rocks. On the other side, nothing but the smooth, dark patch. It didn't make sense. If there had been fire, I would have smelled it. There would have been smoke, or at least some sign in the air. But the night smelled like nothing. No ozone, no ash, just dry desert. I stood out there for a while, scanning the sky. No clouds, no planes, no satellites passing over, just stars, unmoving. And the longer I looked, the more it felt like something should be moving, like the stillness wasn't natural. Eventually I got cold and went back into the tent, zipped it up, but I didn't sleep. Just lay there with the flashlight in my hand, listening to the quiet and watching the mesh ceiling. A few hours later, probably close to dawn, I heard a faint humming. Low, deep, like a generator running miles away. I sat up again and held my breath. It got a little louder, then faded, not like something moving past, more like it was turning down, and then it was gone. When the sun finally came up, I got out and looked around again. The circle was still there. The burn pattern looked almost fake, like it had been stamped on. The edge was too clean. I packed up fast and walked back to my truck. Didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just stuffed everything into my pack and hiked out. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. I don't even know what for. Back at the truck, I checked the tires, then sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, just staring out at the desert. I didn't see anyone. No other vehicles, no trails in the dust, just the same scrub and rocks. I drove straight back to Alpine and found a cheap motel. I stayed there 2 nights, trying to talk myself out of what I saw. Later that week, I went over my gear. Everything seemed normal, no damage, nothing scorched. But my compass was off, only by a few degrees, but still off. I checked it against my phone and a second compass I had in a drawer. Both of those matched. The one I took camping kept drifting, like it didn't want to settle. I didn't report anything. Who would I even report it to? I went back to the same spot 3 weeks later in the middle of the day. Not to camp, just to look. The circle was gone. The earth was dry and cracked like the rest of the desert. A few green shoots were poking up. No sign of anything burned. But the brush hadn't grown back in the ring. It was like the land didn't remember what was supposed to be there. I was driving west on Highway 95, about 30 miles south of Tonopah. It was just past midnight. I'd left Ely earlier that evening after a late dinner with my cousin, and I figured I'd stop in Beatty for the night. I wasn't in a rush, just didn't feel like staying over. The road was quiet, no other cars for miles, and the only light came from the dash and my high beam stretching out over the cracked blacktop. I've done that drive more times than I can count. I used to run deliveries out that way, sometimes even slept in the truck if I didn't feel like finding a room. That stretch near the test range is always kind of eerie, even when nothing weird's going on. You can drive for hours without seeing a gas station, and the desert feels empty in a way that's hard to explain. Anyway, I was sipping from a warm bottle of water, half listening to some old AM station fuzzing in and out, when I noticed the lights. 3 of them, almost straight ahead in the sky, maybe 30 degrees up. They were small, bright white points, but clearer than stars. I figured they were aircraft at first, flying in some kind of formation. That wouldn't have been unusual out there with all the military stuff nearby. They moved slowly. Perfect triangle, equidistant. I kept expecting one to blink or bank, or for there to be engine noise, but there was nothing. No sound, and they didn't flash, just solid white. I turned the radio off and cracked the window, trying to hear anything. Wind, jets, rotor blades. But there was nothing except the tires on pavement. The odd thing was how steady they were. Commercial planes usually drift a little or wobble in formation. These didn't. They held the exact spacing for at least 5 minutes while I kept glancing up at them. They weren't following the road exactly, but they were staying roughly parallel. I slowed down a bit, trying to get a better look. At some point, I pulled over onto the shoulder and shut the engine off. Total silence. I stepped out of the truck. The lights were still there, maybe a little lower now. Then, out of nowhere, they split. Each one darted off in a different direction. One shot left, one up, one straight back. They moved so fast I barely tracked it. No curves, just instant movement. They were gone. I stood there, trying to process what I'd just seen. I thought maybe it was some kind of test aircraft, drones maybe, but I've never seen anything move like that, especially not without any sound. It wasn't until I turned back toward the truck that I saw they'd come back. Same 3 lights, same triangle formation, exactly where they'd been before. That part freaked me out more than the scattering. I hadn't seen them return. I was looking right in that part of the sky. No movement. They were just suddenly back. I got in the truck, turned the key, and drove. Didn't floor it or anything. I didn't want to draw attention, but I wanted to put some distance between me and whatever that was. I kept checking the mirrors and glancing up through the windshield, but the lights stayed where they were for a while. Just tracking, it seemed like. Never closing in. Never fading out. Then they blinked off again. Not moved. Just off, like someone flipped a switch. That was the last I saw them. About 10 minutes later, my dash clock reset. Just flickered out, then came back with the wrong time. Something like 4:11 a.m., which didn't match my watch or phone. The odometer had reset too, like I just turned the truck on for the first time. That kind of thing doesn't usually happen while you're driving. I pulled into Beatty around 1:30 and checked into one of those little motels across from the gas station. The guy at the desk gave me a weird look. Said I looked pale. I told him I'd had a long drive. In the room, I sat on the bed for a while with the TV on mute, just trying to go back through it all in my head. I didn't fall asleep until the sky started getting light, and even then, it didn't feel like I really slept. I was going through footage from a trail cam I'd set up 2 weeks earlier, way out past Wolf Hollow Ridge, close to the county line. That part of the forest doesn't get much foot traffic, which is why I like it. Less human scent, better chance of catching movement patterns for deer and black bear. I'd set up 3 cameras around a salt lick I'd put out near an old, overgrown logging road. It was early October, leaves just starting to dry out and fall. Temperatures had dipped below freezing a few nights, so I figured it'd be a good time to see what was still moving through. The camera I was checking was one of those Browning Recon Force models that triggers on motion and captures about 10 seconds at a time. The first few clips were what I expected. Raccoons nosing around the salt lick, a couple does passing through at dusk, a bobcat sniffing near the stump I'd baited with sardines. Then I hit a stretch of empty frames, just whined in the trees, maybe the camera picking up falling leaves. I almost fast-forwarded through it, but the timestamp on one caught my eye. It was 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the temperature readout was oddly high, 61 degrees. Every other clip from that night hovered around 35 or 36, that one spike for that one frame. I clicked into it. There were five deer in the frame, all frozen mid-step. Now, that's not unusual in itself. A sudden noise or scent will lock them in place sometimes. But these weren't in alert posture. They weren't looking in the same direction, weren't bunched together like they normally do when startled. They were all mid-motion. One had a front hoof halfway up, not even touching the ground. Another had its head tilted sideways, tongue barely visible like it had been chewing or licking its muzzle. What made it strange, really strange, was the light. The whole clearing was lit up like it was noon. No visible source, just a stark, bright white glow. Not moonlight, not IR flash. It looked like the whole area had been illuminated from directly above, but the shadows were wrong. Or missing, really. Nothing cast one. The stump, the salt lick, the deer, they all looked like they were glowing from inside. I thought maybe the file was corrupted, so I checked the frame before and after. The one right before it was totally normal. Grainy, dark, nothing moving. The one after, same. Pitch black. The deer were gone, no rustling, no motion trail. They didn't walk out of frame, they just weren't there anymore. I sat back and stared at the screen. Checked the timestamp again, 10 seconds. Not a glitch, there was real data recorded. Just nothing else like it. Out of curiosity, I checked the other two cameras. They were both set up at different angles around the same clearing, about 40 yards apart. One was pointed east toward a game trail, and the other was more west-facing, catching the edge of a dry creek bed. The east camera cut out at 3:16:42. No error code, no card full message, just stopped recording. Picked up again at 3:19:10 with no deer and no sign anything had happened. The west camera had a single corrupted file at 3:17. Wouldn't open. Said unsupported format even though it was the same as all the others. By then, I was spooked enough that I packed up my laptop and drove back to the clearing that same afternoon. Took my dog, Bramble, a wiry old shepherd mix who doesn't bark at squirrels and isn't the type to chase shadows. The drive out took about an hour, and it was already late afternoon when I got there. I left the truck at the edge of the access road and hiked in. The clearing looked normal. Salt lick mostly gone, stomped down by hooves. I could see fresh scat and a few torn up spots where something had dug or pawed at the ground. The cameras were still mounted, batteries still good, but Bramble wouldn't go into the clearing. She got about 10 feet from the edge, hackles up, nose to the wind, and just stopped. Not growling, not tail between her legs, just staring. I called her twice, but she wouldn't budge. I walked in myself. Nothing felt off at first. No strange smells, no silence. Birds chirped, wind moved through the trees. I went to each camera and pulled the cards, replaced the batteries even though they were half full. Then I walked the perimeter looking for anything out of place. There was one tree, an old white pine, about 30 yards south of the salt lick that had a weird patch on its trunk. The bark was scorched, but not burned, just discolored like it had been exposed to intense heat for a few seconds. No scorch marks on the ground around it. No lightning strike evidence, just that one odd patch. I didn't touch it, I don't know why. I stood there a minute, listening. Then I heard something behind me, fast movement through the brush, but not loud, like something big passing just out of sight. I turned around expecting a deer or a bear, but there was nothing. Bramble was still frozen at the tree line. I called it, and we left. Back home that night, I plugged in the card from the west-facing camera, the one that had the corrupted file. Tried again to open it using a different program. This time it played, but it was just a single frame, stuck. No movement, just static with a faint image over it. I boosted the contrast. There was a figure, not a person, not an animal, just a shape. It looked like a vertical smudge, tall, too thin, barely formed, like something had been standing just beyond the reach of the IR, right at the edge of the frame. Watching. I didn't sleep much that night. Kept checking the windows. Bramble wouldn't leave my side. Every time I moved, she followed. Every little creak in the floor made her tense. The next day I went back to the clearing. Middle of the afternoon. Took a Geiger counter I borrowed from a friend who teaches chemistry. I didn't expect anything. But when I waved it over the tree trunk, the scorched patch, it ticked a little higher than baseline. Not alarming, just higher. It dropped back to normal about 2 feet above and below. I pulled all 3 cameras and haven't put them back up since. The memory cards are in a drawer. Every so often, I take another look at that one frame of the deer, caught in perfect motion, lit up like mannequins in a showroom. It still doesn't make sense. It started somewhere outside of Holbrook, Arizona, right where the 377 forks off from the 277. I was heading north, hauling a flatbed of industrial piping back up toward Farmington. Real quiet night, clear sky, desert cold, nothing but open road and the occasional tumbleweed crossing like it had somewhere to be. This stretch of highway doesn't get much traffic after midnight, especially in late November. I'd been out there maybe 45 minutes past the last gas station. Hadn't seen a single car for miles. just the sound of tires on asphalt and the low hum of the engine. I was sipping from a lukewarm thermos of gas station coffee when I noticed it. A single headlight in my rearview mirror. Not close but visible. Just one light, steady and low to the ground. My first thought was a motorcycle. Maybe a dirt bike with a busted beam. But even then, who's riding out here in the middle of the night? I kept glancing back as I drove. The light stayed the same distance behind me, never gaining, never fading. After about 10 minutes, I slowed down a little, not brake slamming, just eased off the gas to see if it would catch up. The headlight slowed too, same pace, still that same gap between us. I tapped my brakes a few times. No response. Eventually, I pulled off at one of those gravel runoffs, a spot with a faded old cattle gate and a rusted no trespassing sign. Juno, my red-boned coonhound, lifted her head in the passenger seat, gave me a slow blink, and laid back down. I watched the mirror. Nothing came around the bend. I waited maybe 5 minutes. No engine noise, no light. I stepped out, let the door creak shut, and walked a few feet toward the road, listening. All I could hear was the wind pushing through the low brush and the metal ticking of my engine cooling off. I walked around to the back of the truck with my flashlight. Nothing behind me except empty blacktop disappearing into the dark. I climbed back in and drove off. Chalked it up to a trick of distance. Maybe the guy turned off somewhere. But 20 minutes later, there it was again. Same headlight, same distance. This time, I watched it more closely. It never bobbed or wavered like a motorcycle usually would. It was smooth, unnaturally smooth, like it was gliding. I flipped on my CB and asked if anyone else was nearby, but there was just static and silence. I tried again to slow down. The light stayed back. I passed a small maintenance turnout and decided to stop again. This time, I left the engine running and got out quick. The light vanished the second I hit the brakes. I ran back a bit on foot, maybe 100 yards. Juno jumped out after me, sniffing the air like she smelled something strange. Her tail was stiff, her ears up. I stood there a while. Again, no sounds, no lights. Just dry air and the buzz of power lines somewhere far off. When I walked back to the truck, I checked the road for tire marks, anything. It had rained a couple days before, so there were still patches of soft dirt at the shoulder, but there weren't any tracks, not even mine from earlier. Back in the cab, I drove on with one hand gripping the wheel a little tighter than I'd admit. I kept my eyes on the mirror for another stretch. Nothing. Then, half an hour later, near a cluster of butts, I saw it again. One light, same exact spot behind me, same height off the ground. That time I didn't stop. I just stared at it for maybe 10 minutes straight, barely blinking. Juno started whining, low and nervous. She usually doesn't react to much, but she kept glancing at the side window like she expected something to be there. I tried something different. I hit the brakes hard and killed my headlights. Pitch black. When my eyes adjusted, the headlight behind me was still there. Bright as ever. Too bright, even. It didn't cast the kind of glow it should have. Nothing lit up around it. No shine on the asphalt, no beam. Just a perfect, sharp point of white. And then it blinked out. No fade, no slow dip below the horizon. Just gone. I sat there in the dark, heart thumping in my ears. A minute passed. 2. 3. I turned the lights back on, pulled back onto the road, and kept going. No more headlight. I made it to Farmington just after 4 a.m., dropped off the trailer, signed the logbook, and went to the lot where I usually crash for a few hours before heading back. I stepped out, stretched, and looked at the sky. Above me, it was completely clear. Stars like powdered sugar scattered across black glass. And off to the east, way up high, higher than any plane I've ever seen, there was a faint white dot. It hovered for a moment. Then it shot to the left, faster than anything I've watched in my 30 years of driving. Just a blur. Then gone. Juno let out a single sharp bark, then laid down by the wheel well like nothing happened. I didn't sleep that morning. Just sat in the cab, engine idling, waiting for the sun. The motion light went off again at 3:17 a.m., same as the night before. Third night in a row. It was the one on the back corner of the house, the one facing the field behind the property. The sensors mounted just above the kitchen window. When it trips, it washes about a 60-foot patch of overgrown grass in pale yellow light. Past that, it's just scrub brush and old fence posts, and then another half acre of open space before the tree line. We've got about 3 acres total out here in southeastern Missouri. I moved in 4 years ago after my divorce. Needed quiet, got more than I bargained for. Anyway, I only knew it had gone off because Boone jumped in the bathtub again. That's his thing when something spooks him. Doesn't matter what it is, thunder, gunshots, once even a wind chime, I'll find him curled up in the tub, shaking like a leaf. Boone's a redbone coonhound mix. He's not young, not old either. Normally doesn't scare easy. He barks at coyotes, patrols the fence line like he owns the whole county. But 3 nights now, same thing. Light clicks on at 3:17 and Boone bolts straight to the bathroom without a sound. The first night I figured it was a raccoon. I went out with the flashlight, checked the yard, checked the barn, nothing. Second night, I was already half awake when Boone took off. This time I looked at the clock. 3:17. Dead on. I got up slower that time, more annoyed than anything, and looked out the kitchen window. The light was on. The yard looked normal. Still as a painting. No movement, no rustling, no bugs even. Just the grass bending a little in the breeze. Then last night, it happened again. Same time, 3:17. I was already awake when Boone scrambled off the bed and made a beeline for the tub. I didn't get up right away. I waited. Just lay there, listening. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no engine sounds, no voices. Just Boone's nails clicking on the tile as he settled in. I finally got up around 3:25, went to the window. The motion light was still on, but just barely, flickering a little like it was about to time out. I stood there for a while staring at that patch of grass. My eyes adjusted, but I didn't see anything out of place. Then I noticed the scarecrow. I don't have a scarecrow, but there was something out there, about 20 feet past the edge of the light, just where the brightness fades into shadow. Looked like a figure, too thin to be a person, too straight to be natural. No limbs I could make out, just a vertical shape like a post or a man standing still with his arms at his sides. I blinked, and it was gone. I thought maybe I imagined it. Could have been a fence post catching the light wrong. Could have been my reflection in the glass. So I opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch. Didn't bring a light. I just stood there in the warm air, letting my eyes adjust all over again. The field was empty. Next morning I walked out there. Took Boone with me, though he didn't want to go at first. I had to leash him, and even then he dragged his feet. There wasn't much to see. Grass a little flattened in spots, but nothing that screamed animal. No prints, no broken stalks, no burn marks or dead patches. Just grass. But when I looked back at the house from that spot where I'd seen the figure, I realized something strange. From there, you can't see the light itself, just the glow. Whatever or whoever was standing in that exact place would have been perfectly framed by it, lit just enough to see their shape, but not their face. That night, I stayed up. Didn't sit in the living room or anything. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, just me and a cold cup of coffee, and Boone curled up on the rug by the fridge. I kept one eye on the digital clock above the stove. 3:10, 3:15. At 3:17, the light clicked on. No sound, no buzz, no hum, just a soft pop as the bulb came to life. Boone stood up immediately, ears flat, tail low. He didn't look at me. He looked at the window. I stood too, careful not to scrape the chair legs. I walked over to the sink and leaned forward just enough to peek outside. There was something in the field, closer this time, maybe 10 feet from the edge of the light, just barely out of it. Same thin shape, same dead still posture. Not moving, not swaying with the breeze like the grass around it. It was just there. Watching, I think. I opened the back door. Boone growled, a sound I'd only heard him make once before, when a neighbor's pit bull got into our yard. He didn't follow me out. I stood on the porch again, this time with my flashlight. I waited until my eyes adjusted, then flipped it on and pointed it right at the spot. Nothing. The figure was gone. But the grass was moving. Not like something walked through it. More like it was settling. Like something heavy had been there, pressing it down, and had just lifted off. It rippled outward in slow waves. No wind, just motion. I didn't walk out there. I wanted to, but my legs wouldn't move. The light timed out after 30 seconds. The yard went dark. I backed into the house and locked the door. Boone was already in the tub. That morning, I found something. Out in the field, in the same spot where the shape had been, I found 3 small holes, each about the size of a quarter, perfectly round, spaced maybe 2 feet apart, forming a triangle. Not deep, maybe 5 inches, but clean. No dirt piled around the edges, like whatever made them hadn't broken the surface so much as pressed through it. I filled them in and covered the area with an old tarp from the barn. I don't know why. That was last week. Since then, the light hasn't come on again. But Boone still sleeps in the bathroom now, every night without fail. Even when I call him to bed, he just looks at me and slinks away like he knows something I don't. I haven't reset the motion sensor. I haven't walked out into the field after dark, and I haven't been able to sleep through 3:17 a.m. since. I worked as a satellite technician for a mid-sized aerospace company out in Colorado Springs, mostly doing shift work in a windowless control room filled with screens, blinking lights, and way too much coffee. My job was pretty straightforward. Monitor satellite telemetry, check for any anomalies, and make sure everything stayed online and on track. Nothing glamorous. Mostly, it was just staring at radar blips and data points for hours at a time. But there was this one thing I couldn't explain. It started about 6 months into the job. On the monitoring software we used, there was this object that popped up sometimes. It wasn't part of any known satellite constellation or debris field. It wasn't moving like a satellite should either. Satellites follow predictable orbits, right? This thing, though, would show up at random positions on the screen, never twice in the same spot, sometimes close to the horizon line, sometimes far overhead, and it wasn't orbiting. At least, not in any way that made sense to me or my team. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a glitch. The radar or sensor must have had some interference or a bug in the software, but every time it appeared, it was on a different scan at a different spot, with no pattern at all. What made it creepier was the fact that it never stayed long enough for a second scan to confirm it. The monitoring system refreshed every few minutes, but this thing vanished before the next refresh. I couldn't lock onto it or get any data, just a blip that popped up, then disappeared. I asked around, mentioned it to a few coworkers casually, but no one else seemed to notice. Maybe they did and just dismissed it. I even checked with my supervisor, but they waved it off as sensor noise or space junk. One night during a late shift, it showed up again. I was working solo, which was typical for the graveyard shift, and staring at the screen felt more isolating than usual. The control room was silent except for the hum of the air system and the occasional beep from a status alert. I saw it blink onto the screen near the edge of coverage, small, round, and bright enough to catch my eye immediately. I zoomed in the radar display, trying to get a better look. The coordinates flashed. It was over the southwestern US, but not following any known orbit path. I tapped the track button, hoping to follow it on the next scan. The system started the countdown, refresh in 60 seconds. I leaned forward, eyes glued to the monitor. Right before the update, the blip shifted. Not in a smooth curve like a satellite moving along a trajectory, but like it jumped. A few seconds later, it vanished altogether. I checked the logs. No satellite or object matching that signature had been cataloged. The area it last appeared over was mostly empty desert. I spent the next few weeks obsessively checking every scan, waiting for it to reappear. It always came back, but in a different place, with no pattern, and always vanished too quickly to catch more than a fleeting glimpse. A few times I tried calling in to my supervisor during the day to tell them what I'd seen. They kept saying it was just interference or glitches and that I shouldn't worry. But it bothered me. This wasn't normal. One night, I even tried recording the radar feed with my phone, thinking if I caught it on video, I could prove it existed. The video showed a brief blip appearing and disappearing, but every time it happened, the screen's timestamp jumped backwards by about 30 seconds, like the system was resetting briefly. I watched the clip over and over, but couldn't explain that either. The system I worked with was supposed to have strict logging and timing, so that anomaly didn't make sense. A few other odd things happened around the same time. My home Wi-Fi started cutting out sporadically, with no clear reason. My phone battery drained faster than usual, and I'd find my apps behaving strangely, like notifications popping up seconds before I got the messages. One night, about a month after I first noticed the object, I took my dog Bixby for a walk around my suburban neighborhood. It was late, maybe 11:30 p.m., and the sky was clear and cold, the kind of crisp winter air that makes your breath cloud in front of you. I had my phone out checking the satellite tracking app. Yeah, I'm that obsessed. And Bixby was sniffing every tree like usual. I stopped and looked up. The stars were bright and steady, but there was something else. A faint glimmer far off, moving slowly, but not like any plane or satellite I'd ever seen. It wasn't flashing, and it wasn't making noise. Bixby suddenly stiffened and growled low. I tugged on his leash, telling him to calm down, but he wouldn't look away from the sky. The light disappeared, just like the blip on my screen. I thought maybe I was just tired, imagining things. Back at work, I told a few other night shift techs about the dog reacting to the sky, but they just shrugged. The job was draining, and most people were glad to hear something breaking the monotony. One evening, the tracking system glitched again. The object appeared twice on the screen at opposite ends of the coverage area. I blinked, then zoomed in. Both blips pulsed faintly, like they were sending signals or just flickering. The system froze for a second, then both vanished at once. Right after that, my workstation screen flickered and shut off. The backup kicked in, but the system was slow to reboot. When it came back online, the log files for that night had a weird gap. About 5 minutes of missing data. I reported it, but no one else saw anything unusual. The official explanation was a temporary power surge at the facility. That night, after my shift, I drove home under a heavy cloud cover. The streetlights blurred through the fog, and I kept glancing up, half expecting to see the object again. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed my front porch light flickering. I didn't have a chance to think before Bixby started barking, low and urgent. I opened the door and stepped inside, locking it behind me. I checked my phone. The tracking app was frozen on a blank screen. I shut it off, put it down, and sat at the kitchen table staring out the window. Something wasn't right. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like I was being watched. I never told my family about the blips or the weird things at work. They'd think I was losing it, or worse, that I was bringing some kind of paranoia home. A few days later, the object appeared again on the scans. This time I tried to alert my supervisor, pressing the emergency alert button, which was only for serious malfunctions or safety issues. A voice came through the speaker, calm and clipped. Technician, cease tracking unknown objects. Continue monitoring only registered satellites. Report anomalies through official channels. This message will be repeated. The line cut off abruptly. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. After that, I stopped trying to track it. The blips kept appearing, always in different places, always vanishing before anyone else could see them. I kept my head down, did my job. But sometimes when I'm alone at work, late at night, I still see the faint flicker on the radar, like a ghost signal. And the feeling of being watched doesn't go away. It started just after midnight. I'd been driving home from a late shift at the hospital, cruising through the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Iowa. The road was mostly empty, the trees lining the highway barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. It was a cool, crisp autumn night, a little fog rolling in, making the edges of the road look soft and hazy. I remember that drive like it was normal, nothing unusual about it at first. I wasn't in a hurry, just wanted to get home, maybe catch some sleep before my early morning shift the next day. The sky was mostly clear, though with some clouds drifting low and the moon was hiding behind them. About halfway through the drive, I noticed something strange up ahead. At first I thought it was just the fog playing tricks, but the sky started lighting up with this weird swirling glow. Not lightning, not fireworks, more like colored bands of light shifting and twisting. Greens and blues, mostly, but they pulsed and flickered like they had their own rhythm. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before, and I'm out in the country enough to catch the northern lights or storms. This was different. It was quieter, too. No thunder, no crackling. I slowed down, pulled over onto the shoulder, and stepped out of my car. The cold air hit me, fog curling around my boots. I looked up, and the whole sky above me was dancing with that strange light. It felt almost hypnotic, like the air was thick with electricity, but I could barely hear anything except the faint rustling of the trees. I took out my phone to try and record it, but the screen was flickering, and the camera wouldn't focus right. After a few seconds, the lights started to fade, melting away like smoke, and the sky went dark again. Just the regular stars, a few of them faint through the fog. I shrugged it off, got back in my car, and kept driving. I was thinking about calling my brother to tell him, but I didn't want to sound crazy. He'd probably say it was some drone show or airplane lights. When I pulled into my driveway about 20 minutes later, I parked and noticed something off right away. My windshield had something scratched into it, right across the driver's side. At first, I thought it was just a smear or dirt caught in the glass. But then I wiped it with my sleeve and saw the words clearly etched there, "Look up less." I rubbed my eyes, checked the windshield again. The message was definitely there. Fresh, like someone had used a key or something sharp to carve it in just minutes ago. That's when I realized the car wasn't alone. Parked down the street maybe 50 yards away was a black sedan. Nothing unusual about it at first glance, no markings, no headlights on, but the engine was running, humming softly in the quiet night. No one was inside. I stood on my porch staring at it for a while, trying to figure out if it was someone playing a prank or if maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But the car stayed there, motionless, engine idling like it was waiting. I didn't want to go down and check it out, so I went inside and locked the door behind me. The next morning, I told a few neighbors about the weird light and the message on my windshield. No one else had seen anything, and nobody knew anything about the black car. The police said they'd keep an eye out, but didn't seem too concerned. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. I'd catch glimpses of that black car parked down the street again, always with the engine running, but never with anyone inside. Sometimes it would be gone when I looked away for a moment, then reappear a block or two down the road. I started noticing odd sounds at night, low humming, like a transformer buzzing, but there was no equipment nearby. It was always faint and always seemed to be coming from the direction of the woods behind my house. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a bright light flooding my bedroom window. It wasn't the usual street lamp or passing headlights. This light was steady, pure white, and it made the whole room glow like midday. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked outside, but the street was empty. The black car was gone, too. I got dressed and went outside to check. The fog was thicker now, hanging low around the trees, and the street was eerily silent. I walked down to where the black car had been, but there was no sign of it anywhere. The next morning, I found another message, this time scratched into the bark of the old maple tree in my front yard. Just 2 words: "Stop watching." I didn't tell anyone about the tree. I figured it was some kid messing around, but the handwriting looked almost the same as the windshield message, jagged but deliberate. That afternoon, I drove around the neighborhood to see if anyone else had seen something. A few neighbors said they'd noticed strange lights in the sky lately, but didn't know what to make of them. One guy said his dog had been acting weird, barking at nothing for hours. After that, I started feeling watched. Not like someone was hiding behind bushes or spying with binoculars. More like a presence I couldn't see, just out of the corner of my eye. I kept catching shadows in the street lamps that weren't mine, and sometimes when I looked out my kitchen window late at night, there'd be a faint glow behind the tree line. I stopped going outside after dark. One night, I thought I heard footsteps crunching in the leaves outside my back door. I peeked through the blinds and saw nothing but the empty yard. The wind had picked up, and the branches scratched against the window. I tried to call a friend, but got no answer. The next day, I found my phone's battery dead, even though I'd charged it fully the night before. The signal was weak, like I was in a dead zone, even though my house usually had full bars. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more disconnected everything felt. Time slipped weirdly, like some hours passed faster than others. Sometimes I'd glance at the clock and swear it had jumped ahead by 10 or 15 minutes. I thought about calling the police again, but didn't want to sound paranoid. A few nights later, I was sitting on my porch, smoking a cigarette, when the black car rolled slowly down the street. Headlights off, engine quiet. It stopped in front of my house and just sat there for a long minute. No one got out. I stared back, heart thumping, and the car finally pulled away, disappearing into the fog. After that, the messages stopped and the lights faded from the sky. The black car didn't show up again. I went back to normal routines, but sometimes when I'm driving home late or sitting alone outside, I feel that same quiet watching feeling creep back in. It's subtle, like a soft pressure on the back of my neck. I've checked my windshield and the tree. The scratches have all but faded. I don't know who or what left those messages, or why that car kept showing up. I don't know what the lights were or what it meant when they said, "Look up less." But something was there, something I still don't fully understand. I was hiking alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains early October, around midday. Weather was cool but sunny, mid-60s maybe. I'd taken a week off work just to clear my head. Didn't tell many people. Just wanted to be by myself, out in the woods. I wasn't deep into the backcountry or anything, maybe 6 miles out from the trailhead on one of the lesser used trails near Doughton Park. The kind of trail where you might not see anyone all day. I stopped at this overlook for water and a snack. It was one of those spots where the trees thin out and you get a clear view of the next ridge over, maybe a mile off. I was sitting on a flat rock looking out across the valley when I noticed something shiny hovering just above the tree line on the ridge, like a piece of chrome floating in place. It wasn't moving, wasn't wobbling or swaying, just still. At first I thought it was a drone, but it was too far away to hear, and it looked bigger than any drone I'd seen. No rotors, no movement at all, just this small silver dot in the air reflecting sunlight. Not flashing, just catching it like a mirror held up at an angle. I squinted at it for a while. Could have been 10 seconds, could have been 30. I wasn't timing it. I looked down to open my pack, just a quick glance to pull out a protein bar. When I looked up again, it was gone. Not moved. Gone. The space it had occupied was just empty sky now. I scanned the ridge thinking maybe it had dipped behind the trees, but there was nothing. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. Before, there'd been bird song, chickadees, a few woodpeckers further off, the kind of background noise you stop noticing after a while, but now it was dead still. No rustling, no bugs, just wind. I could hear the blood in my ears. It was so quiet. It wasn't like the animals ran off or got scared. It felt like they just stopped, like someone had hit mute on the whole forest. I stood up and turned in a slow circle, trying to listen. No footsteps. No breeze through leaves. Nothing. I don't scare easily, but that kind of silence felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath. I stayed there for a few more minutes, eating, drinking water, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined the reflection. Maybe the birds were just taking a break. But I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Eventually I packed up and kept going, but I didn't take the longer loop like I'd planned. I cut across a connector trail that headed back toward the trailhead. I figured I'd still get a solid hike in, just not as far out. About an hour later, I stopped again at this narrow switchback section with a good view back toward the ridge where I'd seen the thing. I wasn't looking for anything. I just paused to catch my breath, but there was this faint hum like distant power lines. Except there weren't any power lines around. No buildings, no roads, just woods. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't constant. More like a pressure behind my ears that came and went every few seconds. Almost like tinnitus, but deeper. I remember holding my breath to see if it was coming from me, but it stayed the same. Low, pulsing, barely there. I stood still and scanned the sky again. Nothing. No planes, no contrails, no birds. I realized I still hadn't seen a single bird since that overlook. Not even crows, which are everywhere out there. I started moving again, quicker this time. The trail was narrow and overgrown in spots, and I almost missed a turnoff where the sign had fallen down. I doubled back and found it, but the detour cost me maybe 15 minutes. That hum didn't stop. It was steady now, following me like a headache just behind my skull. About a mile from the parking lot, I passed a couple coming the other way. First people I'd seen all day. They looked like serious hikers, packs, trekking poles, the works. We exchanged hellos. I almost asked if they'd seen or heard anything weird, but I didn't. I just wanted to get back. The hum stopped as I neared the trailhead. Just faded out. No pop, no shift, just gone. And the birds were back too. I heard a cardinal somewhere off to my left, and a squirrel scurried across the path, like the woods had started breathing again. When I got to the lot, there were only two cars, mine and an old Subaru that probably belonged to the couple I passed. I stood by my car for a minute, letting my heart rate settle. I hadn't run or anything, but I felt wired. My shirt was damp with sweat, even though the air was cool. On the drive back to the little cabin I'd rented, I kept thinking about how shiny that thing was. Not metallic like a plane, not dull like a balloon. More like polished glass or chrome, something that didn't belong. I didn't tell anyone for a while. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Maybe it was a drone. Maybe the silence was just coincidence. Maybe I imagined the hum. But I've done that hike 5, maybe 6 times since, and I've never heard that kind of quiet again. Not once. I was locking up Hangar 4 at Fallow Creek Airfield when I first heard it. We're not a busy place. 2 runways, 4 hangars, and mostly hobbyists flying weekend Cessnas. I'd been working maintenance there since I got laid off from Delta in '09. Just me and Ernie most days. He handled fuel, I handled repairs. It was a Wednesday, late September. The air had that kind of stillness it gets after the wind dies down, and the sun was already behind the ridge to the west. No one had flown in or out after 3 that day. The weather was decent, just cool and dry with a little haze, but it wasn't grounded for conditions or anything. People just hadn't shown up. Anyway, I was the last one out. I just finished sealing up a nose strut on Jack Morley's 172, ran the checklist, and started walking toward the hangar's big roll door. That's when I heard it. A low hum, pulsing in and out, kind of like a diesel engine idling underwater. Slow, even, not loud, but deep. You could feel it more than hear it. The kind of sound that sits in your chest. I figured maybe one of the nearby farms was running a generator. They've got old equipment, and sometimes you get weird harmonics bouncing off the hills. But this wasn't coming from the side. It was straight above. I stepped outside onto the tarmac, squinting up through the haze. Nothing. Not a cloud, not a plane, not even birds. Just pale sky turning orange near the horizon. And the second my boots hit the pavement, the sound cut off. No fade, just gone. I stood there for a bit, looking around. No wind, no bugs, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something. I walked a few paces out onto the taxiway, just to make sure it wasn't some acoustic thing with the hangar walls. Still nothing. I even circled back behind the building to check the little shed where we keep the air compressor. Silent. I finished locking up, tried not to think too much about it, and drove home. The next day, Ernie said the security lights had tripped around 1 a.m. Could have been a coyote, he said. But when I checked the feed, the video was blank between 12:57 and 1:04. 7 minutes of pure black. Not static, just absence, like the feed never existed. Our system's old, but it doesn't usually do that. Even if the lights don't pick something up, the infrared works fine. It catches rabbits hopping across the grass. But that stretch was just gone. I mentioned the sound to Ernie. He kind of shrugged it off. Might have been a low pass, he said. Military maybe, they run silent sometimes. But even low passes show up on radar or leave contrails. And nothing that heavy moves without at least some vibration. We would have felt it in the hangars. That night I stayed late again. Didn't mean to. Just lost track of time fixing a wiring fault in the panel of an old Piper Cub. I noticed the light shift. We've got these skylights that turn real dim when the sun sets, and realized it was already past 7. I shut down, walked out, and stood for a second, just listening. Same quiet, same still air. I thought about the hum again and looked up. That's when I noticed the stars. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing. There was this patch of sky directly above the airfield, maybe the size of a football field, with no stars at all. Everywhere else was clear, perfect visibility. But that spot? Just black. No shape, no light, nothing you could point to and say, that's something. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. Like looking into a hole where the sky should be. I blinked a bunch, rubbed my eyes, even cleaned my glasses on my shirt. Same thing. Then, just like the night before, I felt the hum again. Not heard, felt in the middle of my chest. A slow thud like a heartbeat, but lower. And then this weird pressure in my ears, like I was climbing an altitude too fast. Not painful, just that muted pop you get when something's not equalized. I turned and walked straight back to the hangar. The second I stepped under the doorframe, the hum stopped. My ears cleared instantly. I flipped the lights back on, stood there for a few minutes with my arms crossed, trying to convince myself I was tired and imagining things. There was no point staying, so I left. The next morning, Ernie showed up late. Said he had to take his dog to the vet. Apparently, she'd been whining all night, pacing the house, wouldn't settle down. I didn't think much of it until he said she kept staring at the sky. Wouldn't stop looking up, he said. Just sat by the back door, growling at nothing. That gave me pause, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to sound nuts. That afternoon, we had a guy named Brent fly in from Henderson. He was picking up some refurbished avionics I'd done for him. He stayed maybe 15 minutes. As he was leaving, he paused and looked up. "You guys doing balloon launches or something?" he asked. I said no. He nodded slowly, still staring at the sky. "Thought I saw something," he said. "Weird shimmer over the ridge, like heat haze but cooler." After he left, I walked out to where he'd parked. Looked up. Same spot, that starless patch, now just a faint shimmer in the air like looking through glass. You'd miss it if you weren't trying. But it was there, a wobble in the atmosphere. That night I stayed until dark again. Brought a thermos and a lawn chair and just sat outside the hangar, watching the sky. Around 8:45, I started to feel the hum again. Same spot, same vibration. But this time it didn't stop. It got a little stronger every minute. Not louder, just denser, like the air itself was thickening. Then the lights along the taxiway flickered. Just once. Then again, the hangar lights cut out completely. Total black. I stood up, heart thudding. I thought maybe the grid was failing. The airfield's on an old line. But then the security floodlight on Hangar 1 flicked on, blazed bright for 3 seconds, then snapped off again. Then nothing. I didn't move. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually, the lights came back on all at once. No hum, no flicker, just quiet. I packed up and left. For a while after that, things were normal, or seemed like they were. Then one night, about a week later, I got a call from the airfield's weather station vendor. They do remote monitoring, send us reports once a week. The tech on the phone said our station had registered a pressure dip localized right above our GPS coordinates for about 4 minutes on the previous Wednesday. He said it was probably a sensor fault, but wanted to double check in case we needed to recalibrate. I asked how big the pressure dip was. He paused. Localized drop of 2.1 kilopascals, he said, centered about 300 feet above ground level, like a sudden absence of mass. I didn't say anything, just thanked him and hung up. Since then, I haven't stayed past sunset. I don't fly. I don't look up when I don't have to. I keep my head down and fix what's broken. But every now and then, around dusk, when the light goes flat and the air turns real still, I swear I feel it again. Just faint, just for a second, like something's moving up there, waiting. I woke up a little after 5 because my dog started whining. She sleeps at the foot of the bed and usually doesn't make a sound unless she needs to go out. She's older, so I figured it was just her bladder, and I got up without thinking much about it. When I slid the back door open, she stopped short. Just stood there, staring at the yard. I gave her a little nudge, but she wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed the smell. Not strong, but sharp, like burnt plastic or something electrical. I stepped out onto the porch barefoot, thinking maybe the neighbors had burned something in a fire pit the night before. But the smell didn't seem to be coming from anywhere in particular. Then I saw the dust. It was pitch black, not like dirt or mulch or even ash. It looked like someone had sprinkled charcoal powder all over the yard. It was mostly in the center, covering maybe a 10-foot circle, but there were lighter streaks closer to the house. The porch steps had faint smudges like someone with soot on their shoes had walked up and then disappeared. I bent down and touched it. It was dry, fine, and clung to my fingers. No moisture, no grit, just black powder. I checked the sky. It was overcast, barely light out. No smoke, no clouds moving fast, just still and quiet. too quiet, actually. There were no birds. Usually there's a few chirping in the trees by then, but the whole yard was dead silent. I tried calling the dog again, but she backed away and hid behind the door frame. She's never done that before, not even during thunderstorms. I ended up just standing out there for a while, looking around, trying to figure out where it could have come from. It didn't make sense. I live in the suburbs, no factories nearby, no construction crews, nothing that would dump that kind of material. And if it was from a fire or something, there would have been ash flakes, maybe some kind of scent. But this was different. Too fine, too uniform, like it had been laid down carefully. Around 6, I got my phone and took a few pictures. The dust didn't show up well in the camera unless I angled it right, but you could make out the contrast in the grass where it thinned out. I sent a photo to my friend Jenna, who works mornings, and asked if she'd ever seen something like it. She didn't answer right away, so I just made some coffee and kept checking through the blinds every so often. By 8:30, the yard was clean. I mean completely, like it had never been there. No black powder, no smudges on the porch. The grass was normal color, no dead patches or burn marks. Even the smell was gone. I went out and stood in the same spot, squinting at the ground, but it was just plain grass. The weirdest part was the porch steps. I had seen those smudges earlier. I remembered thinking I'd need to wipe them down, but now there was nothing, no trace. The dog still wouldn't go out. I tried tossing her ball, even her leash, to see if she'd perk up, but she wouldn't step past the threshold. She kept sniffing the air and pacing. She wouldn't drink from her outside bowl either. I thought maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I imagined it through sleep haze or something, but the pictures were still on my phone. One of them even had a clear boot print in the dust, mine from earlier. I stood in the same spot and held my foot up next to it, but the ground didn't look any different. It was like someone had cleaned it up with tweezers. I didn't really want to go back to sleep after that. I just sat on the couch with my laptop and looked up stuff about black powder in yards. The closest thing I found was about volcanic ash fallout, but we're nowhere near anything like that. Everything else was just guesses. Mildew, mold, pollution, but none of it matched what I saw, and nothing explained how it could vanish in a couple hours. Around 11, Jenna texted back and said it was probably a busted transformer nearby or maybe a blown-up firework. She said she'd seen something like it once after a substation blew during a storm. But we hadn't had any storms, and I didn't hear anything loud during the night. Plus, there weren't any power outages. My clocks were all normal. I kept checking the yard throughout the day. It stayed clean. The dog eventually went out in the afternoon to pee, but she tiptoed to the very edge of the porch and did it on the gravel. Wouldn't go near the grass. I even tried walking across it barefoot again to see if it felt different. It didn't. Just cool, slightly damp in the shade. Normal. That night, I sat outside on the steps for a while with the porch light off, just trying to get a feel for it. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt weird, like I was waiting for something. The neighborhood was quiet. A couple cars passed in the distance. I could hear someone's wind chimes a few houses down, but my yard stayed completely still. No wind, no bugs, no motion. Even the trees didn't sway. I remember watching a plane fly overhead, just a regular one, blinking slowly across the sky, and wondering if it had anything to do with what happened. I couldn't explain why. It didn't feel related, but it also kind of did. That feeling like you're missing a connection just out of reach. A little after 10, I thought I saw a flicker of light over the fence. Just for a second, like someone flashing a small mirror from a distance. I stood up, thinking it might be a flashlight or someone in the woods behind the yard, but it didn't come back. I waited maybe 15 minutes before going inside. The next morning, the dog barked at the sliding door again. Not whining this time, actually barking. When I checked, there was nothing outside. The yard looked the same. But she refused to go near the door for the rest of the day. A few days later, I tried showing the pictures to a friend who works in environmental testing. He looked at them for a while and then said it might have been some kind of industrial dust blown in from the highway. I didn't argue, but it didn't sit right. The coverage was too clean, and the fact that it disappeared like that, with no wind or rain, just didn't make sense. I still walk the yard now and then looking for any sign it happened at all. The grass is healthy, No discoloration, no burn rings, no new growth or dead spots. But the dog never touches it anymore. She sticks to the patio or does her business out front. I haven't brought it up to the neighbors. I'm not really sure what I'd say. Every once in a while, I check the pictures again. They look kind of blurry now, like the black powder doesn't show up as clearly as I remember, but the boot print is still there. Same tread pattern as my hiking boots. I haven't cleaned the porch since. I just want to see if anything ever comes back. I didn't expect to come back to my campsite and find everything arranged like some kind of weird ritual. I'd been out on the Pine Ridge Trail, a stretch of woods a couple hours east of Asheville. It was early September and the weather was cool but clear, dry enough for a good fire the night before. I was solo hiking and camping, which I usually prefer, except this time something didn't sit right. I'd left camp around 9 a.m. that morning, planning to hike a few miles further to the overlook and back by afternoon. Rosie, my golden retriever mix, stayed with me the whole time, except I'd tethered her to a tree while I went down a rocky slope to check out a small stream. That was around 11:30. When I got back, the campsite was off. I swear it was exactly as I'd left it, except it wasn't. All my stuff was moved, and it was arranged perfectly in a circle, like someone had taken their time placing every item down. My backpack, tent poles, shoes, even the little stove and fuel canister. Rosie was loose, standing right in the middle of the circle, looking at me like she didn't understand what was going on. I had no idea how long it'd been like that, but the grass beneath the circle had these faint scorch marks. Nothing heavy or burned through, just kind of darkened and brittle, like a campfire that barely caught. But there was no ash, no smell of smoke, just those faint rings pressed into the dirt. At first, I thought maybe some other campers had come through while I was gone, but no one else was around, and there was no sign anyone had been near. No footprints, no trash, no evidence of people at all except this arrangement. I started gathering my stuff back together, but it felt wrong. Every time I moved an item, Rosie growled low and kept staring into the trees around us. I checked the woods all around the site. No signs of anyone. That's when the quiet started feeling strange. Usually this part of the trail is full of bird song or the rustle of small animals, especially in the morning. But the woods were dead silent. No wind, no bugs, no birds, nothing. Just the occasional snap of a twig, but only when I moved. I packed up as fast as I could, Rosie never leaving my side. The whole time, I had this sense that something was watching me, just beyond the tree line, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. But every time I glanced over, there was nothing. The hike back was tense. The silence followed me the whole way. No birds, no squirrels, nothing usual for a forest. Rosie stayed close, ears pricked, muscles tense. When I reached the trailhead parking lot, I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was nearly 3 p.m. I'd been gone maybe 4 hours total, but it felt like more, like time was off somehow. The strangest part came when I got home that evening. I unpacked my backpack, and among the gear was a small patch of scorched grass stuck to the bottom of my water bottle case. It was dry, brittle, and smelled faintly of something burnt, but I couldn't figure out where it came from. It wasn't part of the campsite dirt, and I didn't recall picking it up anywhere else. Rosie seemed tired and uneasy all night, pacing between the living room and the bedroom, her eyes wide, watching corners and shadows I couldn't see. The next day, I went back to the site with a friend, Tom, who hikes the area a lot. I wanted to see if anything else had changed. We found the spot where my camp had been, and sure enough, the faint scorch marks were still in the grass. Tom looked closer and said the pattern was weird, like a rough circle with tiny arcs radiating out from it, almost like a symbol. He said it looked deliberate, but didn't recognize it from any camping or survival signs. Neither did I. We took some photos, but on my phone, the marks didn't show clearly. On his phone, the pictures were just blurry, with patches of light that flickered in and out when you looked at them. We agreed to keep it to ourselves, didn't want to sound crazy. Since then, I've kept Rosie close, and every time I'm in the woods now, I feel like I'm being watched. Not by animals, but something else. I don't know what exactly happened that morning, who or what moved my gear, or why it was laid out that way. It doesn't feel like any normal camping prank or mistake. It just feels wrong. It was late September when I took the Cessna up from Red Bluff. I'd been flying since college, nothing fancy, just small single-engine stuff, mostly for weekend trips or clearing my head. That Sunday I had the afternoon free, weather looked good, and I figured I'd take a short hop up north over the valley before sunset. Clear skies, light wind, visibility for miles. I filed VFR, took off around 4:40 p.m., just a quick loop, Red Bluff to Lake Shasta and back. Nothing unusual. About 30 minutes in, I was cruising at 6,500 feet, just west of Lassen. Air was smooth. Not much traffic on the radio. I was listening to NorCal Approach in case anyone was nearby, but the chatter was light. The sun was low but still above the tree line, lighting up the clouds from underneath in that soft orange way it does in late summer. That's when I noticed something above me, maybe a few hundred feet higher. Looked like another aircraft, coming up from behind, just slightly offset to my left. At first I thought it was a twin, maybe a Baron or a Piper Navajo, something with a narrow fuselage. Hard to tell with the sun behind it. But what caught my attention was the way it was flying. It wasn't passing me, it was pacing me. I slowed a bit, brought the throttle back just to see, and whatever it was adjusted with me, kept the exact same relative distance. Not gaining, not falling back, just hovering up there. Maybe 500 feet higher, maybe less. I couldn't hear anything over my own engine, but it wasn't making any noise that I could detect. I called it out on the radio. Unidentified traffic, 11 o'clock high, type unknown, altitude unverified. No response. No acknowledgement from ATC or anyone on frequency. I looked up again. The shape was still there. Silhouette was weird. It didn't have visible wings, not like a fixed wing should. The body looked smooth, almost like it was molded. No rivets, no joints. And the way it was flying didn't make sense. No attitude change, no roll. Just this perfect horizontal movement, matching me inch for inch. I kept watching it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't wobbling, no yaw, no buffeting from turbulence. Just solid. Almost too solid. I tried to get a better angle, banked gently right, thinking maybe the sun was tricking my eyes. But as I turned, it shifted too. Same bank, same arc, staying high and left. Perfectly mirrored. That's when I started to feel it. Something was wrong. Not with the plane. Instruments were solid, engine was fine, but there was this pressure, like cabin pressure droply even though I wasn't climbing. My ears popped once, then again, even though my altitude hadn't changed more than 50 feet. And the radio started hissing. Not loud, just a soft static under the squelch, even when I turned the volume down. I looked up again. That's when it flipped. It didn't bank, it didn't roll, it just rotated. 1 second it was level above me, matching my heading. The next, it pivoted, nose down, tail up, but stayed perfectly still in space, like gravity didn't apply. It wasn't falling, it wasn't climbing, just standing on its tail in midair. And then it vanished. No sound, no acceleration, no vapor trail, just gone. I scanned the sky, turned in a wide circle, even climbed another 300 feet to look for anything. Contrail, reflection, movement. Nothing, just clouds above, the orange sun, and a completely empty sky. I keyed up again. NorCal Approach? This is November 289er Echo. I had visual contact with unknown traffic at approximately 600-700 feet, positioned southwest of Lassen, faded out of sight. No collision risk, continuing VFR. They didn't respond right away. About 10 seconds later, a different controller voice came on and asked me to repeat. I did. They told me they had no primary or secondary radar contact in my area other than me. I continued the loop back, tried to brush it off. But on the way down, I kept checking the mirrors, kept glancing out the side windows, expecting something else to appear. I couldn't get the movement out of my head, how unnatural it had looked when it flipped. It wasn't aerodynamic. It wasn't possible, not by any standard I knew. I landed around 6:10 p.m., still light out, parked, tied down, logged the flight, normal flight time, no mechanical issues. Nothing technically happened, so I didn't file a report. I didn't even tell anyone about it for a few days. But for weeks afterward, every time I went up, I kept scanning the sky for something following me. And I kept thinking about how that thing knew exactly where I was, how it mimicked every little turn, every small speed change. like it wasn't flying near me, like it was watching.